1,000 years ago, he was a legendary hero, and she was the genius sage from an enemy nation. They spent their lives competing to prove who was stronger, until tragedy tore them apart. Now both of them have reincarnated in an era where magic is everywhere. The problem? They now engage to each other. Unable to stop competing, the strongest hero and the strongest sage enroll in the same magic academy to settle their rivalry once and for all. Can two reincarnated legends stop competing long enough to fall in love? One day, a large army clashed with its opponents, and a terrible battle began. Everything around was ablaze with the remains of battle. Until the bridge was destroyed, they wouldn't be able to reach the base. The knights discussed it. This was the hero Altain. It was Rein, along with Elria, who she couldn't allow him to wander around, destroying everything in his path. He addressed Elria by name, saying that she had finally come, and was overjoyed. She flew up to him on her magic broom and replied, yes, she had heard he would be here. After that, she adjusted her hair and said that she had wonderful magic today. Rein replied that he was eager to see it. After hundreds of equal battles, would they finally be able to find out who was stronger? She replied that today would be their 629th battle. Rein asked in surprise, was it really that many? He thanked her for diligently reminding him of it every time. She replied that it was because he always forgets. Rein shouted that he couldn't do anything about it, and that he was an idiot, unlike her. But even so, he would never show anyone pity on the battlefield. He raised his sword and spoke confidently, saying that as long as he was called a hero, Elria added that as long as she was called a sage, she couldn't lose to him. In the Altain Empire, a man with immense military might, lived a man called a hero. Until the end of his life, he participated in numerous battles and never lost or knelt. And in Vegalt, a country at war with the Altain Empire, lived a girl called a sage. Using a principle, she improved her country's position in the war and increased the power of its spread of various magical techniques. These two constantly met on the battlefield, and they never slept or rested, as if eternally reveling in battle. And the only one against whom the hero Rein would go to any lengths was Elria, the sage. However, this relationship cannot last forever, and eventually one of them will emerge stronger. After some time, Lord Rein asked if the sage had died. His subordinate answered yes, and Rein asked again, are you sure of this, Liat? He replied, yes, it is confirmed by information because it was a message sent from a spy who infiltrated Vegalt. Rein sat down on a chair and said, seriously, he always thought he was the first one destined to die. Liat added that upon learning of her death, His Excellency Rein had also received a royal decree from the country. He asked again, what? They said that now that the sage is dead, he is just a useless old man? Liat replied, no, the royal decree states that now that the sage is dead, he should take advantage of the chaos in the enemy country and lead his army to invade the neighboring country of Vegalt and end the long-standing war. He gritted his teeth in anger and wished the Altain leaders a curse. Liat confirmed that there was no doubt this was their best opportunity, and Rein lowered his gaze and said nothing. Liat continued, but everyone who had ever been present on the battlefield knew that neither of them wanted to raise his forces or have their lives wasted, so His Excellency had entered the fray alone and faced him. That was why he was so upset. They couldn't use the death of a great sage to wage war, who also desired peace with their Excellency. Instead, they should mourn her death. He began to tremble and shed tears, and at that moment, Rein rose from his seat and said that he had just said some nice things and he should be sure to convey those words to her. He threw off his knightly armor, and Liat asked again what he was doing. He replied that he was simply going for a walk and didn't need to prepare as if he were going to war to meet a friend, right? He touched his sword, and after a while found himself on the border between Altain and Vegalt. As he approached, a multitude of arrows began flying in his direction, and he immediately ran back at incredible speed. The knights who saw him were frightened, not expecting to see Rein of the Altain Empire there. Rein broke into a run, and pushing off from the ground, ran straight up the wall at incredible speed, leaving the knights stunned. When he scaled the fortress itself without any additional equipment, the opponents shouted for the mages to destroy him. But Rein grinned as everything passed him by, and one of the mages fell to the ground, screaming in fear. Rein extended a trembling hand toward him, and at that moment, several sharp spears flew into his back, causing him to groan in pain. Behind him, another mage appeared, his hand shaking, and he uttered, Hero Rein, why did you come and invade this country? Rein replied, isn't that little Tiana? Is she here to take her dead teacher's place? Tiana sobbed loudly and screamed for him to answer her. At that moment, Rein was attacked by many more spears, causing him to be destroyed and caught in the blast. The surrounding mages and knights watched as the dust cleared, and when it did, Rein was still standing and looking straight ahead, despite being covered in bruises and wounds. He looked into Tiana's eyes, who continued to sob, and said that he had come to say goodbye and that this was his only purpose here. After some time, he approached the Vegalt palace itself. Rein burst inside, and the knights shouted at him to stay put, but suddenly they realized who he was. He replied that he apologized, but he didn't have much time left, so he asked for permission to pass. The knights began to shout, what is he going to do with their great sage? They trembled and cried, and Rein replied that before he died, He just wanted to talk to her, so they shouldn't stand in his way. He approached her as Elria lay in the coffin and greeted her. He asked if she really died. She wouldn't just come back in this life out of nowhere, would she? He sat on the floor and said that the guys she raised were very strong, but they still couldn't compare to her, and it was hard for him to resist accidentally killing someone. He addressed her by name and said that she was something unimaginable, and even now, most people remember them with respect. And yet, they still couldn't decide who was stronger, but he was glad to have fought with someone like her for over 50 years. If they were in another world, he was sure they would have been friends. He remembered how one day Elria reached out to him and said that between them, she wanted to decide who was stronger and showed him her fist. And at that moment she was lying in a coffin, and Ryan fell right next to her in a pool of his own blood and died next to her. A moment later he found himself in another place as a baby and saw his mother wishing him good morning, and he was crying and looking at her with tears in his eyes, lovingly. He was very small and stood up in his crib. He died, right? He was still an old man a minute ago. Anyway, who was she? His mother answered that it was time to drink milk. She handed him a bottle and said that everything is ready. This is Mom's special milk. He became scared and wondered where he was. This scared him very much, and he started screaming loudly like a child. 18 years later, he grew up and held an axe in his hand. His friend asked if he could cut down this tree too. He answered, of course, please let them move away for a bit. The boys said, okay. And when Ryan approached the tree, he swung his hand and struck it, cutting it in half with a single blow. The tree fell to the other side, and the people around marveled at how lucky they were to have Ryan. They couldn't believe he could do all this without magic. They wished they could do that too. He replied that he didn't know how to use magic, so there was nothing he could do about it. Where should he take it? He picked up the tree, and the people started shouting at him to wait a minute. A squirrel was sitting right in the hollow, eating a nut. The people shouted that, even more importantly, it was a new species, a truly incredible discovery, and he suggested reporting it to the newspaper. Rain told them to calm down, because he was sure he would spend his entire life like this. Meanwhile, in the palace, a girl was reading the newspaper and saw a photo of Rain. She realized she had finally found him. After a while, his mother shouted Rain's name and ran into his room. He was coming down the stairs, saying hello and asking, "What happened?" His mother screamed. What did he do? He replied that he didn't remember doing anything special, and Mom continued to say that there was an aristocrat from the royal capital who came looking for him this morning, and they told him to go to the village chief's house. He scratched his head and wondered what an aristocrat meant. In other words, one who fights magical creatures with magic. He didn't think he could have anything to do with this, did she? She replied that she, too, thought it was a mistake, but the noble called him by his name. Rain replied that it didn't mean anything anyway, and his mother screamed at him for being too calm, despite his mother being so worried about it. Reen thought about it and didn't understand. Nothing could have surprised him more than waking up and finding out that 1,000 years had already passed. His old homeland, the Altane Empire, had long since been destroyed and absorbed by the neighboring country of Vegalt, now known as the magical kingdom of Vegalt. Magic had become something accessible to absolutely everyone, so there was little to surprise him with, especially considering his past life. His mental age was close to 90. He told his mother it didn't matter because he would first go to the village headman. It wasn't nice to keep people waiting. She yelled at him that if he'd caused trouble or something, he could have pretended his mother didn't know anything about it. He replied that he didn't care, and Mom was dumbfounded and started screaming, falling right on the floor, that it was sad and she was offering to atone for his sins together. Rain replied that he'd first refute the notion that he'd somehow screwed up. He went outside, and people asked what he'd done. He confidently replied, nothing. Reen scratched his head and realized that rumors had already spread throughout the village when he suddenly noticed a special carriage. It was a magical carriage, the first time he'd seen one like it, and judging by everything, it must belong to a high-ranking aristocrat. Suddenly, a man ran up to him, shouting his name and shaking him by the shoulders, screaming, "What have you done?" Rain replied to the leader that he was the second person to tell him that. The leader had screamed that he thought his life was about to end. Rain asked, "Is a big shot here?" He replied that it wasn't just any aristocrat. He could properly greet a distant descendant of the royal family of the well-known magical kingdom of Vegalt. Rain asked again, why would such a person want him? The leader replied that he didn't know. The only thing he'd been told was that he'd understand everything when they met. Never mind that, given that incident, he couldn't abandon a single villager. Rain responded, well, thank him, village chief. When he entered, he apologized and saw Elria standing before him, delighted, and saying they hadn't seen each other in a while. He was stunned when he saw her and couldn't react. Elria came closer to him, and he tried to say something when he suddenly bowed sharply and asked her to accept his apology. She asked why he suddenly spoke so formally. Rain replied that it was because he should watch his tone when speaking with a member of the noble Kaldwin house, She asked if perhaps he didn't remember anything. Rain asked again, had they met before? Was she looking for the guy who was a hero? She was delighted at first but suddenly froze and said that Rain, who knew, wouldn't speak like that. He told her to wait. They were just going around in circles now, weren't they? Elria shouted that right now he sounded exactly like him, and Ryan replied that it was because he was the guy she was talking about. Like the hero of all time, it was him depending on the situation and who he was talking to. Elria exclaimed with joy, so it was him after all. Yes, and was she the Elria he knew? She replied, yes, she was from Vagalt and was about 200 years old. She liked to read books and drink warm tea with milk, and she often fell asleep in the sun when she was tired. He looked at her thoughtfully for a while, and said that to recognize her, he had nothing but her name and location, and they had seen so much on the battlefield. Elria apologized to him, and said that to find out, they could simply fight each other. Rain replied that this simplifies things, but there was no place where she could use her magic. Elria replied that if Rain could dispel her magic in 10 seconds, she would definitely recognize him. When they reached a deserted field, he said it should be a good place to quietly release some magic. Elria asked where they were. He replied that he worked there, and Elria asked, what does Rain do for a living? He replied that he plows fields, cuts down trees, and delivers goods. There was a silence between them, and she asked, why? He replied that it was because he couldn't use magic, but apparently he was still as strong as in his past life, so she can give it her all. Elria replied that she understood everything and decided to begin. When she pulled out her staff, she created a fiery flame above herself and swung it, attempting to strike Rain, who easily bypassed it and overpowered her magic with just his bare hands and fists. He smiled and asked how many times they had fought. She answered, 6,329. He replied that he wouldn't remember anyway, and she chuckled at the fact that she was the only one who knew and had always been the one counting them. She was glad that he turned out to be Rain, and Rain would never have thought that he would see her like this again. Elria confirmed that she had reincarnated, so she thought he might be here too, and he asked again, without any hard evidence. That's incredible. By the way, how did she find him? She replied that she saw a squirrel in the newspaper and recognized him from the photo in the article. He asked again, so she even checked rural newspapers? She replied that she was very confident in her intuition, and Ryan addressed her by name and asked what kind of reincarnation she was talking about. Elria replied that simply put, it is the transfer of all memories, abilities, and the old life into the new one, and to be precise, it is called reincarnation magic. Ryan asked again, in other words, Elria used this magic? She replied that it was not her. Reincarnation magic is the name she gave it tentatively, and in theory it exists, but she doesn't know how it works. Rain was surprised, because it turns out she knows what will happen if someone uses reincarnation magic, but not the process itself or the method of using it, right? Come to think of it, even the sage who created the magic doesn't know how to use it. She got angry and replied that even she, a sage, doesn't understand things. But if it were true reincarnation magic, she would look exactly the same as in her past life, but her appearance would be slightly different. He asked again, is that so? Elria got angry and asked again, is that so? She looked away, embarrassed, when suddenly Ryan froze and asked again, could it be that she was reborn as a human and not an elf? She replied that that's why she and Ryan now have the same ears. So what about the fact that he can't use magic? What were his results on the magic test? Rain asked again, the one who asks the question as a child. As soon as he touched the examination instrument, it broke, causing him to be scolded and called ignorant. Well, he'd rather live his life in this village than bring trouble to everyone with his magic. Magical beasts were still everywhere, but the world was much calmer now than in his previous life. Elria reminded him that Rain was a hero, right? He smiled and replied that all that was in the past, and Elria added, besides, Rain is as strong as she is. He added that it didn't matter and that only a sage was allowed to fight in the first place. This caused Elria to ball her fists and scream, Rain, let him marry her. He froze, his mouth hanging open in shock, and then asked again, what? She said that he would now be her fiancé, and he grabbed his head and replied, there is no need to talk about this, as if it were something predetermined. Elria replied that if he belonged to the Caldwin family, a relative of the royal family, then regardless of his magic level, he could pass the entrance exam to the magic school. He would be able to demonstrate his abilities and become a mage, and that was the perfect plan. He asked again, but wouldn't that be considered cheating? Elria replied no. They weren't cheating anyone, because Rain was strong enough to fight her for over 50 years, and besides, everyone called him a hero. And now no one would recognize him, simply because he couldn't use magic. And that was fine with her. He bowed and said he was very glad to hear that, as for her proposal, but before he could finish, Elria suggested they see who was stronger. She smiled, and he asked, that's unfair, isn't she thinking about it? She replied, no, not really, because she was sure Rain felt the same way. There were times when they were called sages and heroes, and the loss of one of them could lead to the fall of their countries. That's why, despite their fair fights, they tried not to take each other seriously. But if only their wishes had been taken into account, everything would have been different. He said that he would not run or hide, and would always accept her challenge, after which they bumped fists as a sign of friendship. After some time, people gathered around the carriage, and when the protagonist entered the village chief's office, he asked if there was any bad news. He scratched his head and said that it had been decided that he would go to the capital with Lady Elria. She, meanwhile, was deeply embarrassed by the fact that she had told him to marry her, and at that moment, she went outside with him. When she looked around, she saw a crowd of people shouting, "Is he really going to the capital?" They were his acquaintances, so let her get to know them too. "The princess is so beautiful." People were shouting, and Rain asked them to listen to everyone. He turned around and offered her his hand behind his back. When she took his hand, she became embarrassed, and at that moment, the head ran out of the room and shouted at everyone to do what Rain said. "You idiots!" He shouted at everyone to move even further away, and Rain thanked him for that. He told Elria to go, and she thanked him for his help. When they got into the carriage, he said he couldn't even believe all this was happening. She remained silent about it, sitting incredibly embarrassed next to him. He addressed her by name and asked if she could even hear him. She blushed with shame and horror, and replied that she could hear everything, and he thought that he really could. After all, she had been shy around strangers even before her reincarnation, and Elria hid her face and apologized to him. After that, he addressed her by name again, and asked if she remembered him saying he couldn't use magic, and if she had any idea why. She replied that the reason he couldn't use magic might be because of his magical abilities. He asked, "What?" She twirled her finger and replied that, first of all, a magical device functions as a conductor of a person's magical energy, and regular magic is like water. So the magical device is a water canal. His magic is more like stone, which is why it doesn't flow, and if you try to channel it into a water canal, it will simply break. He asked, "Is that so?" She replied that she didn't know why he had such magic. If he's going to use it, he'll need to make a device that suits his particular style. Rain began to wonder, "That's all great, but how long will it take?" Elria replied that, although she had developed the theory of magic, it had taken her 100 years. He replied, "I understand. Thank you for just solving the riddle he'd been searching for 18 years. She asked again, "Does he want to use magic?" He stretched and replied that he wanted to know what it was like to use magic. Elria replied that it was true, but even with magic, she couldn't defeat him. He was surprised and told her not to be so sure. After that, she grabbed his shirt and thanked him for agreeing to marry her. He was dumbfounded and said that he should be grateful to her, but he was very surprised when she proposed to him so unexpectedly. She shouted that it was all so they could fight together again. He replied that everything would be as she said. Since this was the only way for ordinary people to become a qualified mage, then whatever happened, it would make solving the problem easier. She asked again, "Problems?" He replied that they both reincarnated after 1,000 years, so it was certainly no coincidence. Someone is involved, and they need to find them and figure out their purpose. Even if it's a coincidence, they have nothing to lose. His being a commoner will make it difficult to find an answer, so they'll have to ask her. Incidentally, her family is related to the royal dynasty. She replied that the royal daughter, Tiana, had adopted their surname. He realized it was that same Tiana, and Elria replied that the Caldwin family now inherits the name of the sages. He replied that he had become the fiancé of a girl from such a noble family, and grinned, and Elria said that everything was fine. He asked again, is it really a problem for her that he is her fiancé? She shook her head and replied, of course not. If she cared that they were sworn enemies in a past life, she would never have proposed marriage. He replied that he trusted her for that reason, too, and at that moment she smiled and thanked him for trusting her. He replied, thank her too, Elria. In his past life, he wasn't engaged to anyone, and she started screaming. Seriously? He replied that it wasn't surprising at all. All he ever did was fight and risk himself, so he was always rejected. She was surprised. Really? He replied that those were memories of the past, but in this life, they still remembered him. At that moment, she started screaming and blushed even more, and he didn't understand what kind of reaction she was. She said that stories about him still circulated among people, but the thing is, over 1,000 years stories about him had been greatly dramatized, and he asked again, for example, how? Because he was from an enemy country, he was shamelessly slandered. But before he could finish this sentence, she started screaming. No, it's not as he thought, but she can tell. He thought that this was really bothering him, and Elria assumed that they had arrived. This was her home. When they got out of the carriage, he saw a huge palace and was very surprised. Suddenly, they heard someone shouting Elria's name loudly, and the man landed next to them. It was Elria's father, and she announced that she was home. He shouted that he was sure she wanted to tell him something else, didn't she? He heard that she had gone on another excursion. Elria's father's name was Galleon. She calmly replied that everything was correct, and he shouted that she was good for being honest with him. And Elria added that she was sure she had left a note, and also warned the people in the mansion. Galleon shouted that it was wonderful, she had taken care of it so they wouldn't worry, and she added that she had brought her fiancé, and he shouted that it was good. He refuses. Elria said that she had already brought him here, and he asked again, what? She had already dragged him here? She pointed towards Rain and said that his name was Rain. He replied that it was nice to meet him, and Galleon began shouting, Okay, so he's Rain. Let him get out of here, and pointed him away. He apologized and said he couldn't do it, and Galleon shouted, "Is that so? Then welcome to the mansion." Reen said he was very understanding. Galleon exclaimed that he personally would never allow his daughter to marry a man without a pedigree, but since he was not at home, he could not make decisions regarding the Caldwin house. When he opened the doors, a girl in incredibly beautiful clothes approached him and asked, "Galleon, what is all this fuss about?" He replied that he heard that Elria had brought her fiancé. This girl's name was Alicia, and she asked again, "Is that so? Then please let him stand aside. He is too noisy." Her name is Alicia Caldwin, and she is the head of the family. Rain knelt and apologized for the late introduction. His name was Rain Frieden. She asked again, "Frieden?" She had never heard his family name. He replied that he came from a mountain village in the Arlate region, from a family of commoners. That's why the head of the Caldwin house had never heard of this. She replied that for a commoner and a rural person, he held himself well. Rain replied that as someone who had come to greet her, he tried to at least show some politeness. At that moment, Elria's mother turned to her and said that he was much more reasonable than she, wasn't he? She asked again, "Isn't he wonderful?" Alicia replied that she had just insulted her and was very worried about her daughter's future. Elria said she understood everything and had finally found Rain. Alicia told Rain to please raise his head and relax. He expressed his deep gratitude and added that it would be a shame for their family to turn away from someone who had shown respect to the Caldwin. First, let him allow them to accept him as their guest. When they went up to the house and sat across from each other at the table, Ryan asked, "Will Elria and Galleon not be present?" Alicia replied that these two weren't suited for such a conversation, so she thought things would go more smoothly if they discussed it among themselves. She just wanted to understand what was going on and how it all came about. Rain reflected that he didn't think a lame excuse would work with her. He replied that the reason they decided to contact him was so he could use the Caldwin family's name and status. She asked, "So it was Elria's idea, right?" He replied that it was true and she could ask her about it to make sure. Alicia said she didn't need confirmation because he was Rain. He asked, "What?" She replied that when she was little, she had told her out of the blue that she wanted to find a man named Rain. But when she asked her why, Elria had just shaken her head and said nothing, and she had simply said that she was sure he was here. So she simply assumed it was childish babble and didn't take it seriously, saying outright that this child had been strange since birth. She had a talent for magic and never cried even as a child, and she was even afraid of her own mother. Rain thought about how, 1,000 years after her past life, she was waking up in a world where she knew no one. And even in this situation, she continued to search for him without any leads. He asked with a smile, "Is that so?" Alicia added that if he was the same Rain, then she would agree to approve their engagement. He replied, "Does she really want to leave their entire home to a guy with no bloodline based on Elria's words alone?" Alicia replied that this was what she lived for, that for her, it would be natural for her parents to fulfill their precious daughter's wishes. "Don't you think so? So what about him?" He said Elria was his only equal, and they had been separated for a long time. But just like her, who continued to search for him, he also never forgot about her. He wondered what she would think of this serene world if she saw it. If Elria were in this world, he would want to be with her. Alicia said she gave him a passing grade for the proposal, and he replied that that was quite strict. Alicia continued by saying that everyone can only talk about the action results and the conditions for accepting the engagement. Achieving the title of mage with Elria at the same magic academy, and he must bring himself to the academy. Ryan asked again, "How exactly?" Alicia asked again, "Why doesn't he just use his power?" She had high hopes for him, since even Elria approved of him. She asked Galleon to come here for a minute, and he abruptly opened the doors and started shouting. Was she calling him? Alicia told him to be quiet and come in, because he was too noisy. When he approached her, Alicia told Galleon to suggest they see how good he was and decide whether he was worthy of joining the Magic Academy. He yelled at her to leave it to him, and Rain replied, "Just dodge all of Galleon's attacks and deal the blow himself, okay? And one more thing, please don't let them complain if he accidentally destroys the entire building." After a while, they found themselves in a special room, and Rain, turning around, asked what kind of room it was. Alicia replied that it was a special facility for magical training run by the country, where even non-mages could participate in magical combat. Elria also trained here. She would go talk to her, and Galleon would test his abilities thoroughly. He yelled at her to leave it to him, but now he turned to Ryan and suggested they enjoy their sparring. Reen asked again, "Would you be okay with them using the same victory conditions as they had agreed upon?" Galleon shouted, "Of course he'll win. If they start from now, he'll be able to dodge all of Reen's attacks for an hour, but it'll likely be difficult to land a blow. Galleon is the son-in-law of the Caldwin family, so he must be one of the best modern mages." He said that if Rain could hit him, he'd let him call him Daddy. He bowed and asked to simply call him Father-in-law. When they faced each other, Galleon punched the ground and shouted that they'd begin immediately. He was surprised and realized that there was no one in front of him, and this was Ryan's excellent reaction. Reen jumped right above him and hit the wall, and Galleon, heading towards him, shouted that now they'll be a little serious. He tried to hit the wall, but Ryan managed to dodge and realized that if Elria trained here, he thought there must be a strong magical barrier somewhere. He said it was impressive. Galleon said it felt like he was training with Elria. There was no need to hold back. He apologized and said that in that case, he would make his move. At that moment, Elria was sitting in her room, and her mother came in, wanting to talk about something. Elria asked what happened to him. Alicia grinned and said that Galleon was dealing with him right now. Was she sure he was the Ryan she was talking about? Elria confirmed that she was sure of it, because he was the one she knew. Alicia replied that she never thought she would actually find him. Elria replied that she was a little worried too, but he was really here, and that made her very embarrassed and cry. Mom asked again, she really likes him, doesn't she? And Elria confirmed, yes, she likes Rain, and became embarrassed again, after which she asked if he thought she might like him. Alicia screamed, why is she slowly losing her confidence? Elria replied that it was because she had never experienced such feelings. She realized this when she was on the verge of death and wanted to see him, wanted to see his smile. If she could see him again, Elria thought that this time she could tell him that she liked him. Alicia was surprised that they both thought alike, and how they viewed everything in the past tense. Elria was dumbfounded and realized that she wasn't trying to hide something from her mother and others about her past life, and all because it was their shared secret. Alicia said okay, then she won't ask anything, and Elria thanked her for that, after which Alicia asked, had she already talked to him? She told him everything, right? About how she liked him and wanted to spend her life with him. She replied that she hadn't told him this, and Alicia replied that she knew she was shy and awkward with words, but she couldn't believe that she hadn't even told him about it. Elria screamed, no, that's not what she thought. She thought about it for a long time, and the word engagement was the first thing that came to mind. But at that moment, Alicia recalled Ryan's words, sincerely saying he wanted to be with her, and saying he was a pretty good man to be able to say something like that in such a situation. Elria was surprised and asked again what he'd said. Alicia replied that she couldn't tell her, but she should make sure she confessed her feelings first, and then ask him. In that case, she'd be interested in confessing to Rain and letting Galleon train him. Elria asked her mother what they were doing, and she replied that in order to confirm their engagement, she had instructed Galleon to test his abilities. If she wanted to ask her to be gentle with him, she wouldn't listen, okay? Elria replied that that wasn't the issue. Rain couldn't use magic, but he was very strong, and Dad was in danger. This startled Alicia, and at that moment, her father flew into their room, right through the door. Moments later, a powerful explosion rocked the room. They didn't understand what had happened, and when Elria looked out the window, Rain was there, screaming. Hadn't she seen Galleon fly by somewhere here? She replied that he had just flown in here, and he asked again, what? This was despite the fact that he was holding back, and Elria asked again, what did he do? He replied that he had been told not to hold back, so he gently pushed him away. Alicia was stunned with surprise, and Elria said that in that case, she thought her father was fine. Alicia shook with fear and asked again, what was that? Elria replied that this was how her mother learned how strong Rain was. The man she loved was the strongest. A month had passed since he had blown the wing of the Caldwin estate to pieces, and as expected, there was no mention of Altane or the hero. It would be understandable if it were the village library, but it's surprising that even a prominent family has no record of it. Elria approached him and told him he had received a letter. He asked if he had actually passed on the news of their engagement to the village, and his mother had written, so, he's engaged to the daughter of the Caldwin family? She realized it was a prank, right? He wouldn't be able to fool his mother, but she would remain silent to laugh at his father's reaction when he returned home. His mother didn't believe him, and Elria asked again, what was she writing? He replied that she seemed to think it was a joke. The village chief had asked him to bring souvenirs from the royal capital. Elria wondered if he'd already visited the royal capital, if you think about it, and Ryan replied that it had been over the past month. Alicia had thoroughly taught him good manners and family etiquette. This was definitely connected to the indignation over the destruction of an entire wing. Then Elria suggested they go shopping together, and Ryan asked again, what? She said that the clothes she would need to wear for the exam at the academy should be different, and he confirmed that with this look, he couldn't fit the image of Elria's fiancé. She was glad she had done it. It would be a date with him. Sometime later, when she was getting ready, Alicia said that she was very sweet and hoped that they would establish contact and enjoy their date. Elria replied that they were already leaving, and Ryan, waiting for her near the door in a gentleman's suit, said that they should go. She was delighted and said yes. When they went out into the city, he said that he borrowed it from Galleon, who said it was wonderful to use Dad's things. They were great ideas. He doubted whether he should ask him for this, after causing him so much trouble. He was very sorry. Elria replied that she thought it was cool and unusual to see a different side of Rain, and today, she wanted to find something that would suit him even better. He answered, okay, and when they entered the store, they took measurements, and after a while found themselves near the fountain, and went into a cafe for a snack. It was delicious food for him, and he said that the cuisine at Elria's place was delicious. But 100 years ago, something like this would have been unthinkable. She replied that adding a little salt was simply grilled meat and stale bread. He laughed and said he understood completely, and Elria added that she was most pleased to be able to eat like this with him. He noted that she had breadcrumbs on her face, and Elria was very embarrassed by this, after which Rein straightened her nose and removed the crumbs. At that moment, embarrassment arose between them, and Elria blushed with shame. She recalled her mother's words, telling her to confess her feelings. She tried to say something, and suddenly Rein broke the table. She asked again, "Is he okay?" He replied that he was a little nervous, and Elria informed him that there was a place she wanted to show him. After some time, they arrived there, and Elria pointed and said, "Over there, that was the Magic Academy of the Kingdom of Vagalt, where they would take their exams." Rein was surprised by how huge it was, and Elria added that she could have actually enrolled there at age 12, but postponed her enrollment because she was looking for him. He thanked her for taking the time to support him, and Elria said that the king had also asked her to hold off so that they, as princes, wouldn't enroll at the same time. As a reward, she received sweets. They were delicious. He chuckled at how everything was as expected of her. It was strange for Elria to think that they would now study there together. He replied that it would be so if he successfully passed his exams. She asked again if he'd ever liked anyone in his home village. Rein replied that for him, anyone who'd been a month in their past life for 90 years looked like their children or grandchildren. She replied that she had, and he added that he'd always thought about her, just like she'd been looking for him all this time. Elria blushed and said that she didn't just want to fight him, but also wanted to spend time together, like today. That's why she was glad they were engaged. She offered him her hands and asked him to please take care of her from now on. Rein replied that the feeling was mutual, and that she should please take care of him too. They shook hands after this conversation. Sometime later, they appeared at the Vagalt Royal Magic Academy. Many people had gathered there, many of them coming from other countries to take the prestigious exam. Those people turned to Rein, who said, "So Elria, how long will she hide behind him?" She was very shy and said in a trembling voice that everyone was looking at her like that, and she would continue to walk hiding behind him. He replied that it was very difficult for him to walk like that, and Elria asked if it would be easier for him to walk if she climbed on his back. He asked again, wouldn't that make her even more embarrassed? Basically, everyone looked at her because they thought she was cute. She asked again, what? He thought so too? He didn't understand what it mattered what he thought, when suddenly she said that it was very important to her, so let him speak. He sheepishly replied, "Of course," and at that moment, she was dumbfounded. Rein confirmed that yes, he was proud of it, and wanted everyone to see it and envy it. She thanked him for these words and said that they would try to make him as proud of her as possible. He asked then, perhaps she would unhook herself from his sleeve? Elria shouted that he had an artery here, and that he should not forget it. He didn't want to die in front of the whole crowd, did he? When they approached the door, Rein apologized and said that they were coming at the invitation of the Kaldwin family. The accompanying girl said, "Miss Elria, Mr. Rein, right? Then they should come this way." She would never have thought that she would be together with Elria, a sage who had reincarnated and could not have dreamed of such a thing. Mr. Rein, she knows nothing about him. What is his connection to this family? Elria replied that he was her fiancé, and the girl replied that she understood everything. She became embarrassed and suddenly began to scream. "Isn't this Miss Elria?" She's congratulating them. "So he, Mr. Rein, comes from a noble family?" He replied, "No, he's just a commoner, so she shouldn't pay attention to it." She started shouting that it was impossible to ignore. At that moment, a girl waved at them and shouted, "Be careful. Someone large is approaching." A huge dragon created an explosion on the ground, and the escort announced that it was Rufus, from the Celios Federation. Rein recalled that this was a country located across the strait and living in harmony with magical beasts. She confirmed this was true, and furthermore, since this country specializes in summoning magic, a wizard's power is determined by the magical creatures they can tame. Despite the fact that conflicts with other countries had long since ended, their country is a minefield of magic, and at the Magic Academy, they can achieve impressive results. This will allow them to consolidate their advantage in relations with other countries. Rein stated that the point is that the war is proceeding sequentially, and the girl confirmed this to be true. Ms. Rufus can use the 4 dragons that symbolize Celios, and she is widely known by the alias of the Dragon Princess. Rein marveled, saying that this was simply amazing, when he suddenly saw Elria grab his arm and begin to pull him toward her, murmuring sullenly that she also possessed summoning magic. He replied, "Of course," and she added that she possessed other magic as well. Rein smiled and told her to surprise him with something else next time. Elria informed him that he would be more than surprised. And here was the place where their exam would be held. They would need to destroy that installation with magic within a limited time. Elria silently looked at the object in question, and then asked if they could make the exam more difficult. Rein patted her head and told her not to embarrass the employee. She replied that it was indeed too easy, when suddenly the girl shouted at them to wait a minute. At that moment, a magical beast appeared on the hologram, surprising the guys. Elria replied that it was a training projection simulating a magical beast. The employee informed them that, as they had already understood, Miss Elria had developed it based on the samples provided at the academy. She explained that she meant she wouldn't have any trouble with it and, turning to Rain, told him not to miss it. At that moment, she swung her staff and cast the reveal spell. This time, he would clearly see that she was hitting harder. The monster began to roar and run toward her, after which an explosion erupted across the battlefield. Elria smiled and asked, "Well, what will he say?" The accompanying employee fell to the ground in fright and couldn't utter a word, and Ryan remarked that it looked much brighter than before. She also made sure to remove the target's barrier defense, leaving its original strength unchanged. Rain patted her head again and said he'd never seen such a powerful beast in terms of combo resources. The girl asked again, how could they remain calm after seeing something like that? Rain replied that he was used to it and reflected that 1,000 years ago, they used even more powerful magic. The girl exclaimed, "Miss Elria, the magic she unleashed was level 10 magic. That is, the highest level, right?" She hadn't seen anyone except high-level mages use such magic. Rain apologized and asked what his grade would be if he could blow it away. She asked again, "Is that it?" Rain added that the fire was spreading like a forest fire, and the girl noted that it was created with magic. To extinguish it, magic of a level no lower than Miss Elria's was required. He replied that he understood everything and set to work, so he would definitely get a good grade and punch the air, causing the flames to immediately go out. Moments later, everything really did fade away, and he spoke something like this. A gust of wind sent rocks flying in all directions, and it all came together perfectly. Elria remarked that he was hitting, as well as always. Rain replied that he wasn't in top form yet, he'd used weapons and armor before. Elria also patted him on the head, and said that he was still very strong. The employee watched them in bewilderment, and suddenly she received a call. She said that the exam organizers were calling them both. When the guys entered the office, Eliza, the organizer of the Royal Magic exam, announced that they were too strong for the academy, in their opinion. First, she, Elria, had heard about her rare talent from the king, and she'd shown more than enough today. She's very strong, but Eliza is so afraid she'll kill someone while she's here, and she's only allowed to use magic up to level 5, and if she breaks this rule, she'll be expelled. Elria, frightened, replied that she understood everything, after which Eliza turned to Ryan and asked, "Who the hell is he?" He replied that he was apologizing to the organizer of the royal exam because he had misunderstood her question. She replied that she couldn't understand why she hadn't realized he existed, and he apologized, when suddenly she started screaming. Did he think his apology would make her feel better? Rain turned to Elria and whispered that he knew elves were immortal, but wasn't she the same age as her? Elria whispered back that an elf stops aging between the ages of 15 and 20, so it's impossible to tell her age. As sad as such a fate is for elves, Rain asked again, did the organizer stop maturing before she stopped aging? At that moment, Eliza became angry and screamed. Did they call her short? Well, Rain, that wasn't magic, was it? He replied yes, he couldn't use magic, and she asked again, what was that then? He replied that it was simply a blow of sufficient force, which caused Eliza to scream, only making things even more confusing. He could contain that power within the academy's walls, right? Rain replied that he could use less force, but he had a bit of trouble with that. Eliza then screamed that she had trouble with that too. By order of the Caldwin family, she had to give them appropriate grades. Rain said they could make some concessions, as long as their marriage remained in effect. Eliza admitted that Alicia had warned her about this in advance, and she was also to blame for underestimating them. So, Rain, he could restrain himself outside of his role as examiners, right? She usually didn't mind a little overstepping, but not to such an extent as today, otherwise she would become very angry. Incidentally, she didn't think she'd hear Elria and Rain at the same time. Rain asked again, what did she mean? She mentioned a legend known only to the elves. She'd only heard it briefly from her grandfather. At that moment, Elria exclaimed in surprise and shouted, the organizer. Rain, trying to understand the situation, asked again, why do the elves know their names? She replied that they weren't the names of the heroes who lived 1,000 years ago, but rather that the elves had created a legend about the words of a sage at the moment of his death. Ryan ran up to her, slammed the table, and asked what exactly that legend was. Eliza, startled, asked again, what's that? He was such a smart-looking guy, hadn't he heard of it? He replied that he didn't care, as he wanted to hear it from her. He understood he had a chance to obtain information from thousands of years ago, and at that moment, Eliza told him the legend of how the hero fell in love with the sage, right? They were both surprised and embarrassed. Rain asked again, the hero fell in love with the sage? Eliza started screaming. Yes, he did. The human hero and the elf sage, though enemies, wished each other well. They fought for 50 years to prevent as much damage as possible for both sides. But during one battle, the sage fell and soon passed away. When the hero learned of this, he made his way alone to King Begalt's palace. The hero, while in the castle, was on the verge of death due to his wounds. But why did he even come there? He said he came to say goodbye, his face hanging low, How cool was that god? At that moment, Elria began to cry, turning away and trembling. Eliza exclaimed, "What, if not love, had driven him to endure so much?" She was sure the sage would have been happy if she had heard the hero's words. The elves have many stories based on this legend, and Rain thanked her for sharing it, dear organizer, then apologized and said that it seemed Elria was unwell and they should leave. Eliza was surprised. How did she really feel? Elria struggled to her feet and replied, "No worries," and Eliza once again asked him to restrain himself from using his power. Finally, she congratulated them on passing the exam at the Vagalt Magic Academy. The guys headed for the exit, and Ryan remarked that the story hadn't turned out so bad after all. Elria, embarrassed, replied that this story had been passed down from generation to generation by the elves. Even before she realized it, they were already in love. She hadn't told him this because she was afraid he wouldn't like it. But was she really mistaken? Rain clutched his head and replied that she wasn't mistaken. It was just an elven legend. Elria asked again, "Did he really come when she died?" He replied that he did, and Elria asked again, "Did he come alone and wounded?" He replied that he didn't want to kill little Tiana, but only to see her, so he would have gotten into trouble anyway on the way to her. Elria screamed, "What did he say the last time he saw her?" He thought that in the end, they still hadn't figured out who was stronger, but he'd been happy fighting with her for 50 years. He said that he probably told her nothing. Elria's mouth dropped open in shock, and he replied that he couldn't. His mouth opens like a fish, nah, and he didn't think a person would imitate a fish before dying. Elria asked again, "What did he say?" He replied that they needed to go and tell Alicia that they had passed the exams. Elria tried to catch up with him to get some interesting information. When they arrived at the palace, they were congratulated on passing their exams at the Magic Academy. Everyone around them rejoiced at this success. Elria thanked her parents, and Rain also expressed his gratitude, after which Alicia said that they would soon be moving into the academy dorms, shifting responsibility for Elria to him. Rain. He asked again, "What?" She replied that Elria was shy, quiet, and not very polite, and that she had other concerns. At that moment, Galleon ran up to him and started shouting that he hadn't meant to ask him, but was asking for help at the academy. She found it very difficult to be around strangers, and it would be very difficult for her to attend academies. Alicia remarked that he was acting this way while still sober, and Galleon continued shouting that the most important thing he wanted to tell her was that he shouldn't even touch her until the wedding. Everyone around him was stunned with embarrassment, and Ryan replied, "Okay, he understands everything. It's punishable by death, after all." At that moment, Alicia approached her daughter and told her that she would have to work hard. Sometime later, they were congratulated on their admission to the Magic Academy. From now on, they all study at the same academy, and Eliza hopes that each of them will make every effort to achieve their goals. When they arrived at the student dorm and the Vagalt Magic Academy, they were given the key to their shared room. Elria was stunned and blushed when she realized they would be sharing a room, and Ryan asked, "Is it okay for a guy and a girl to share a room?" The sorter replied that this was permissible for engaged couples of noble birth at the time of admission, and if no special circumstances prevent them from sharing a room, they try to do so. He understood, so that's how it works. They have their own room for engaged couples. Elria, would she agree to live with him? She replied, yes, she'd rather live with him and feel safer than with some stranger. Ryan said that was good. Alicia had just asked him to look after her. She replied that she wasn't that independent, but when they entered the room, they were very surprised by how everything was laid out. It was simply a wonderful room, and Elria, opening the refrigerator, said that if she had stocked up on magic power in advance, he would also be able to use magical items. Reen replied that since the ceremony was over, maybe they could cook something? He was simply starving. Elria asked if he could cook. Reen replied that he could make simple dishes like the ones she made when they were surviving in the wild. Elria replied that it was nostalgia. She once hunted rabbits if she spotted them on the battlefield. Reen, surprised, asked if she really did that too. She replied that when she first joined the army, she was treated like a reserve wizard and had to eat only fruits and plants. If someone wanted to boil water, enemies would definitely notice them by the column of steam. Instead, Reen would replenish his thirst with squeezed juice and budao fruit or something similar. Elria replied that she understood everything. Although it was delicious, she always stained her clothes with the juice. Rain mentioned that the Vagalt soldier also had a white uniform. The Altane soldier's uniforms were black, so stains weren't as noticeable. But once, she found his location by smell alone. Did she remember that? Elria replied that she remembered everything. The wind was blowing directly towards her, which is why she was able to memorize everything. Since they were finally reunited, she suggested a simple lunch today, like in the good old days. Rain asked again, was she going to eat that now? She replied that, with a touch of nostalgia, it shouldn't be so bad. And besides, she could help him with the cooking, so she tied her hair back into a ponytail with an elastic band. The guys continued cooking together, and Elria said she hadn't cooked with anyone since childhood. Rain asked again, does she mean her past life when she was an elf? She replied that she remembered her mother praising her several times, but she had never heard praise from anyone since. Rain approached her and patted her on the head, saying that the best praise is when they make up legends a generation later. Her mother would definitely be proud if she knew about this. She wiped away her tears, embarrassed, and confirmed these thoughts. After they sat down to dinner, Elria asked what he was like as a child in that life. He replied that he only remembered being very lonely, that's all. In that life, he was a very weak child, and often lay in bed with a fever, so he was a burden to his parents. In the Altaïn Empire where he was born, there was a gulf between rich and poor. The country's policy was to exploit the poor and expand its lands despite limited resources. Most children from poor villages were conscripted, and he couldn't be a soldier, so he was a disappointment to his family. He was deeply saddened by this and tried to become stronger. His fever would subside, he'd go to work, and then it would return. He repeated this over and over again, and without even noticing, he'd transformed. He was deliriously happy, not just to be on par with the others. He'd become stronger than everyone else and finally been recognized. But Ryan wasn't a human being, he was a fiend. His mother, mocked for giving birth to a fiend, also began to be seen as a fiend, and soon he was assigned to a mercenary group. Even the mercenaries pitied him at first, but no matter how dangerous the battlefield, he always dealt with enemies with extreme brutality and returned alive, and soon no one came near him. He continued working for mercenaries, trying to find others like him, but to no avail. At this rate, achieving ever-increasing success in the military, he suddenly began to be called a hero. You never know what life has in store for a person. Elria approached him, hugged his face, and told him he was so good, so great. She smiled and looked him in the eyes, and he became very embarrassed, then asked why. She replied that she just wanted to praise him in return. She really enjoyed receiving praise from someone, and he was alone, so he probably hadn't realized it yet. Now that she was there, he wasn't alone, and if he tried hard, she would continue to praise him. She was perfect for this role. He laughed and said yes and thanked her for praising him, his older sister. At that moment, she became even more angry and embarrassed, and he replied that he understood everything and would stop doing that. After a while, they began to examine the next room, and it was the bedroom. There was enough space for two and a huge bed. It was just out of curiosity. She wouldn't mind them sleeping in the same bed, would she? She started screaming. Of course she wouldn't mind. And did he mind? Rain easily answered, no, he sleeps like a log. And Elria said that she probably tossed and turned in her sleep. Sometimes she also gets drowsy and falls asleep. He replied that if she was uncomfortable, he could sleep in the living room. She grabbed his sleeve and said that she was lonely and wanted them to sleep together. If he didn't mind, he replied that it was impossible for him to mind, and he wondered what he would think of her father's expression when he went to bed. When morning came and the alarm rang, Ryan started screaming. Is it really morning already? Elria hugged him, and he felt a little uneasy. She was sleeping so sweetly that he watched her and then how she snored. He was glad that he had once been old, and at that moment he told Elria to wake up because it was already morning. She didn't want to, and continued to hold on to him. And he screamed that she needed to go to the bathroom and that she would feel more energetic if she took a bath. She sat on the bed and said that she wanted to wash herself, and he said sure, she should go. While she was in the bathroom, he would make her breakfast. She reached out to him with her hands and said that they should do it together. He said, no, that's too much. But before he could finish, she began to fall back onto the bed, and he screamed that he understood everything. He offered to go to the bathroom together, and please let her not fall asleep again. After that, he poured water into the bathroom and told her to come in. Elria entered with a towel and asked why. He realized that everything was clear. She was not herself. She grabbed his shirt and he asked, what's wrong? She kept telling him they should do it together, and he said he couldn't. And Elria said he'd come with her. He knew they'd be late at this rate, and he got angry. He then said he'd hold her hand until she got in, so please let her finally give him a break. Elria said she understood and started to undress, when Ryan suddenly yelled at her to stop, but she still took off her clothes and asked what was wrong with his face. He had no idea what was going on, and replied that he always covered his face while taking a bath. It was his habit. She replied that she didn't think he could see anything like that. Ryan asked her not to underestimate the heroes, as he could easily perceive his surroundings even with his eyes closed. Elria replied that heroes were incredible, and he asked her to take his hand and get into the bath. She climbed into the bath and felt incredibly warm, a blissful sensation. Rain replied that the bath water was warming, but she replied that wasn't what she was talking about. It was the warmth in her hand. He smiled and replied that it was. When they got ready, they arrived at the university, and Elria asked why he looked so tired. He wondered if it was even good or bad that she didn't remember anything, and replied that it was a small thing. When they entered the office, everyone was surprised to see Elria herself. They shouted that they'd been waiting for her and heard that they'd used a level 10 spell during the entrance exam. Indeed, someone had worthy inherited the title of sage. At that moment, they had a sense of déjà vu. Elria started screaming in fear that she was nothing, and that Rain was much more remarkable, right? She moved him closer to the people, who were dumbfounded and had already started yelling at Rain. He was canceling a 10th level spell cast by Elria. He must have some connection to the family to be able to keep Elria company, right? He didn't even know what to say and said he was very flattered. His name was Rain, and one day he would claim the Caldwin family name. Unlike everyone else here, he was a commoner. Even without knowing anything about him, everything was sincere, and he was very impressed with them all. The guys watched him in amazement and asked questions. Naturally, they would acknowledge his strength. Just as a sage is valued regardless of her elven origin, they should be tolerant of everyone who learns magic. At that moment, one of the students decided to interrupt the conversation and said that it was doubtful that ordinary people like him could really manage this. And so what if an ordinary person could cancel a 10th level spell? Let him forgive him, but he himself doesn't come to believe it, and to him, he's not at all cool. Ryan replied that if he was truly strong, of course he would criticize him. This is the son of the Vermian family, Ferris. Reen recalled Alicia telling him that this family, like theirs, had a strong lineage. The son of the current generation, Ferris, is very talented and blessed with a huge reserve of magic, and if it weren't for Elria, all the attention would undoubtedly be focused on him. But he is self-centered and always blames others for everything. He is just trash. As a member of a prestigious family, she is embarrassed. But if he has a chance, could he please do something about his character? Ryan didn't understand what he had done. But at that moment, Ferris started yelling at him, saying that he's a commoner, and how is he related to the Caldwin family? It's insulting to them, who have long protected Vagald. Reen replied with a smile that if he doubts his identity, he can confirm with Alicia. The guy started shouting that that's not the point. He is a lowly person. The very fact that he was able to enter this academy is outrageous. Ryan replied that he had excelled in both written and practical exams, and had also received the principal's approval. He also mentioned school policy. No matter who he was, he must learn the magic left by the sage. Bears began shouting at him not to confuse them with his strange grandfatherly attitude. His friends begged him to stop, as provoking someone connected to the Caldwin family could somehow affect the Vermian family. Fairs exclaimed, "Connections? This guy is probably just a simple servant, and it doesn't matter what he says." Rain replied that he was right and apologized for the late introduction. He was Elria's fiancé. He hugged Elria and held her close, causing her to blush and everyone around him to be stunned. After that, Rain told her to go and sit in a comfortable place, and when he walked away from the others, he burst into laughter. He told Elria that seeing his puzzled face was very pleasant. Elria replied that she hadn't seen him in a long time and had already forgotten about his bad behavior. Ryan said not to say that he was so bad now. People's excessive impudence can lead to the death of their allies. She knew that. It was better to insult them now than to do it later. Didn't she think so? She replied that she was beginning to understand why his country's soldiers were so obedient. At that moment, one of the guys waved his hand and called them over, saying that if they still had room, how about eating with him? There was no one around, so he was rather bored. Rain thanked him for this and said that his name was Rain. Let him call him whatever he wants. The guy also introduced himself. His name was Weasel, and he was also pleased to meet him. Elria asked again, "Weasel?" She'd probably heard of him. He replied that his family engineered magical equipment. The magical items Miss Caldwin used, like her staff, were made by his sister. Elria asked him to tell her that she used them very carefully. Weasel replied that he was sure his sister would be pleased. When she first received the order, she spent hours on it. Elria suggested he call her by her first name, and Weasel replied that it was clear and would call her Miss Elria. She asked again, but why did Weasel take the mage test? Considering there were classes for magic engineers. He replied that he was more of a practical person. Besides being a mage, he primarily wants to understand not only himself but also his surroundings, and thus create more practical magical items. That's his goal. Depending on the person, he could be a hindrance. He didn't care. Ryan explained that his desire to create a good magical item aligns with the school's ideology of studying and developing magic, and the guys who complain simply don't understand that. Elria replied that the important thing is to study diligently. Weasel replied that when they both talk like that, it somehow truly seems important. By the way, he heard that he'd cancelled Miss Elria's 10th level magic. Could he see his magic item? Elria replied that Ryan's magical powers were a bit special, his mana flow wasn't corrected, and he couldn't use magic items. Weasel didn't understand, as it was impossible in that case, but let him try to destroy it. He handed him the special item, and Ryan exclaimed that he couldn't simply break it. Weasel explained that it was a spare, and furthermore, as a magic engineer, he wanted to know under what circumstances the magic item would break, so he couldn't do anything about it. For your information, this magic item was made personally by him. He allowed various people to try it out, but not just for normal use. Its durability allows it to withstand heavy use and repeated use. Ryan was surprised, and suddenly his glasses shattered. Weasel started screaming. Does he know this is one of his best works? Ryan exclaimed. He already told him to break it, didn't he? He replied that he didn't think he could break it so easily, then took his hands and silently examined them. As someone who excels in magic, what does she think of this phenomenon, Elria? She replied that, roughly speaking, she thinks Ryan's magic is different from others. What does he think of this, Weasel? He said that he honestly doesn't know, but he thinks what Miss Elria said is true, since the protective magic and engraving are damaged. In his opinion, this has something to do with the fact that the magic item is also physically broken. He needs to analyze this and observe the failure a couple more times. He still can't say anything about it, let alone come to a conclusion. It's fair to say it's completely unknown to him. He asked Ryan how he managed to obtain such magical power. Rain asked mockingly, who knows? It was so long ago that he'd already forgotten. And by the way, why was she eavesdropping? A girl sat next to them, right under the desk, and exclaimed in surprise at being noticed and hit her head. She couldn't understand why the table was so hard and away from her body, then said she was a stranger. Rain suggested calling the guards, but the girl started screaming that she was truly sorry. Her name is Millis. She's 17, she's from the outskirts of Noaberg village, and her only friends are sheep. Since she came here on a scholarship, she thought she might make human friends. Rain said he'd let Elria resolve the situation, and she replied thoughtfully that she was so energetic and liked it, so everything was okay. Rain said she was lucky, and that he was upgrading her suspicious person consciousness to that of a classmate. She exclaimed that she'd been thinking about the performance all night and really appreciated it. Rain was surprised. So why had she been eavesdropping on their conversation? She replied that the nanny had been mulling it over in her head, so she was looking for someone she could approach. Rain looked at her questioningly, then said, so let her just approach people as usual. She was surprised and asked again, what did he just say? That's impossible. And things like last night's party were great, or how their harvest is this year, he understands. How can a simple person like her join in on something like that? And he shouldn't say random things or act like it doesn't concern him. She also heard that he was born on the outskirts, right? He replied that it wasn't in the wilderness like hers, okay? And she apologized and asked, then could she ask where he was from? He replied that he was from Ares, and she exclaimed, that's the same thing. There's only forests, mountains, and rivers, right? Weasel turned to Elria, who was also silently watching what was happening. And Rain replied that her country was nothing but mountains. Millis shouted that they had such special places as clean water and sheep. Rain grinned and replied that they had high-quality timber and orange farms. She didn't know that, and they had recently discovered a new species of squirrel. They continued arguing, and Millis shouted, no, they have sheep. Reen said that she had already mentioned this, and she exclaimed with tears in her eyes that maybe all she had was high-quality water and sheep, but at this rate she would become a loner. At the very least she needed a fellow countryman. At that moment, she pounced on him to hug him, but Elria managed to stand right in front of Ryan and hug her back, saying she would be her friend. Millis asked again, really? Elria asked her if she didn't like her. She exclaimed that was not the case at all, as she was incredibly touched. Weasel also stated his name and said he was glad to meet her. With him, she could drop all formalities, Miss Millis. Ryan also waved and suggested they get along like two villagers. She was delighted and exclaimed that she had 3 human friends, and among all the friends in her life, finally, human names. Ryan continued to say that the teacher was nevertheless late. Weasel said that now that he mentioned it, the lesson had already started, and there might have been some problem. Millis assumed the teacher was lost, but that was impossible, as even Millis had found the right room. She asked again, could he please stop treating her like an idiot? He said not to worry, as she was a smart girl. At that moment, a knock was heard from heels, and someone burst into the classroom, causing a bright flash of light and a loud roar. The girl said she was close. Eliza would be angry at his tardiness. She was their homeroom teacher. It was a special rank, Alma. Special rank magic is capable of using 10th level magic, and she received this rank for being able to destroy a huge destroyer monster single-handedly. All the students started shouting, asking why the legendary special rank and homeroom teacher. She answered them. The king himself gave her an order last week, didn't he? They were part of a large-scale dragonfire capture. One of the boys asked what about the king's orders? She grinned and replied that she had recently carried them out. King Vigalt and the headmaster had asked her to become a teacher. She was also from this academy, so she knew how things worked. She also hoped they were somewhat excited about training with her. She'd quickly explain what they'd be doing next. There were 8 newbie classes, each with 40 students. Throughout the year, they would be assessed both individually and as a class, and then their average grade would be calculated. If their grade was above the average, they would qualify as mages and be able to graduate. The most important part was the class assessment. Even if they achieved the highest individual score, they wouldn't be able to become mages, and it was also their responsibility as mages to prioritize group work and not focus solely on themselves. She turned to the furry girl and asked her to explain the duties of a mage. It was Millis who replied that investigating crimes with magic meant defeating dangerous animals, right? Alma confirmed that was true, but there was more. Evacuating local residents to a safe zone, securing an evacuation route, isolating a dangerous area, conducting rescue operations, and much more. To be prepared for any situation, a team must consist of several people, possibly even several dozen for large-scale operations. So this is a shared responsibility for the entire class, and she hopes there will be no deadweight in this class. Individual assessments will be held once a month and will consist of a real battle and a situational exam, where their reactions to various situations will be tested. Class assessments will be held 4 times a year, including a comprehensive exam with various conditions in which they will compete against other classes and even schools. She asks them to remember this. They will also review lectures on magical theory, monster habits, stats, and basic abilities according to the textbook. Now that she understands everything, it's torture, so she suggests moving on to practice. She rang the bell, and after a while, they found themselves outside. Here they will have a training match. Millis, confused, began screaming and hugging Elria. The boys were surprised that this was a separate space created by a magical object, and it was interesting. It looks like the wind and grass here are real. Alma said that this magical item was created by the director, and until she cancels it, they won't be able to leave, and no one from the outside can interfere. Does anyone want to face her? Of course she'll hold back. None of the students wanted to do that, and she kept suggesting that if no one challenges them, they won't get out of here. Understand? At that moment, Ferris raised his hand and said that then he would be her opponent. His name is Ferris. He can use 7th tier spells, and he has also trained for magical battles since childhood. She replied that this sounds promising. In that case, it will be more serious, okay? He was dumbfounded and asked could she be a little more specific? Alma replied that she might break a few of his bones, perhaps. At that moment, he exclaimed, "Of course not. She'll break his bones, and that's called holding back?" And at that moment, Elria raised her hand, and Alma said that fate, by all appearances, was too weak for her, unlike that boy. What was her name? She gave hers, and Alma said that this was the unusual child that Eliza told her about. She heard that she was only allowed to use spells up to level 5, and then she would adapt to her. Elria replied that it was fine, she didn't need to hold back. More importantly, should she hold back any longer? At that moment, Alma immediately got down to business, and Elria pulled out her staff. Alma said it was great and that she had defended herself so easily. Everyone watched how amazing it was and how many sparks there were around their duel. When Alma landed, she said that this magical barrier, unlike physical attacks, dispersed magical energy, repelling even magical attacks. How elegant her magic was. Is there anything else? Elria replied, of course. Any requests? Alma asked if she could use anything, but she had to do it as if she were fighting her for real. She wanted to see how many bones she could break. At that moment, Reen shouted to everyone, "Is anyone still able to move? Please have them take out those who are unconscious or unable to move. They could get hurt if they stood too close." Things were getting interesting, and he'd watch from here. What about the two of them? The guys were shouting that they wanted to see too, because this was magic he knew nothing about. Millis was shaking and couldn't move an inch. At that moment, their struggle continued, and Elria placed her sword in front of her, easily defeating her opponent. Alma started screaming, asking what kind of magic was this? How could low-level magic compete with high-level magic? Weasel said that Alma's instructor was right. It was hard to admit, but Miss Elria's magic casts dozens of spells simultaneously, and despite only using low-level spells, her magic could counter a high-level teacher's spell, which should be impossible. Ryan replied that she hadn't cast the spell directly. She had used it to cast more spells. How could they do that? Millis asked again, "Is this all magic?" He replies that the number of spells below the level she can use, her magic requests, is approximately 1,000. Millis exclaimed, "1,000? Then the huge number of marks that Weasel measured with his magic item? What is it?" The number of cast and combined spells. She uses a bunch of spells and combines them into one. I think it's called multiple deployment. In other words, she uses as much magic as there are stars in the sky to suppress and neutralize it. That's how she does it. Weasel asked if he had ever seen the full potential of this spell. Ryan replied of course, he never took his eyes off her. She was brighter than anyone else, so he was crazy about her. At that moment, a flash occurred between the teacher and Elria, and when Alma landed, he said that this was not good. Elria replied that everything was fine. She was able to handle all the spells, but she still wasn't really fighting, right? Alma replied that everything was clear. It would be rude to continue holding back, right? After that, she relinquished her magical hand and said, "It's time to march, time to go to war, death squads." Numerous skeletons rushed toward Elria, and she said, "Try to fight this black flag as if her life were at stake." Rain was dumbfounded. A black flag? Elria wondered how they knew those words. Alma chuckled and asked if she'd hurt her or something. Elria grabbed her staff and replied, "Yes, there's only one person who can say those words, and she has a few questions for her." Millis wondered what had happened to Miss Elria. She looked gloomier than before. Weasel guessed it was most likely because of something Alma had said. Millis didn't understand what was going on and asked Ryan, but Elria swung her staff, and at that moment, Rain lunged at the skeleton with incredible force. All the guys' mouths dropped open in shock and shouted, "What?" He defended Elria, apologizing for interfering, but he couldn't just sit back while someone used his own words. Alma asked, "Is he another one of those weirdos? He definitely doesn't use any magic. How did he just send her skeletons flying?" He replied that his name was Rain, and he was pleased to meet her. If she answered his question, he would gladly answer hers, because it was so old that it had almost completely faded, so at first he didn't even notice, but after that phrase he was sure why she was holding the Altain banner. He pointed at her, and Alma asked mockingly, "Who knows?" She didn't understand what he was talking about, but if he didn't answer first, then she wasn't obligated to give him an answer. Suddenly the guy started shouting, "What is she doing?" Alma asked, "Come on, let them not say that Elria can see it." Millis screamed that she could see everything and hear her. Was she crazy? You can't just use a 10th level spell on a student. That's not what she created that magic item for, understand? If she breaks it, she'll get angry and furious. Alma said fine, and then turned to Ryan and said she'd discuss his question later. He replied that they'd been interrupted, so there was nothing they could do. In any case, they all needed to dedicate themselves to magic, and train so they could be stronger, just like them. And they had to give it their all and become mages. The guys sat on the ground in despair, saying it was impossible because she was on a completely different level. They'd gotten a little carried away after passing the entrance exam, but now they were starting to lose confidence. All they could do was use a little magic, that's all. Alma came closer and said that they'd all worked hard to get into this academy, right? They couldn't give up now because they hadn't even started yet. The guys responded that she was right, and Alma added that she was saying they would be training with her until the end of the year. Do they understand? She believed they would all be stronger than anyone else, so they should follow her. She was going to teach them one of the most important principles of any mage. They all had to run until they passed out. After this order, the guys took off running. The girls were thoroughly enjoying the water treatments. Millis sighed happily and exclaimed, "That's just right." Elria agreed, adding, "The huge baths are wonderful." Millis replied, she absolutely agreed. In her village, she went to the bathhouse every day to wash herself, so the absence of such a thing here was very noticeable. The sage thanked her friend for inviting her here. Millis replied sheepishly, "You're welcome." And thank her, she truly was grateful that she carried her here. An hour earlier, Alma had asked the students why they had no stamina at all. Let them look at the protagonist and Elria. They're still fine. The protagonist spoke up. He was used to this. One of the students, lying on the grass, could barely articulate. "Something's wrong. He can feel it." Elria noted that it seemed like no one else could move. Maybe she should carry them? MC asked. "By transport?" She replied. "Technically, it's a 6th tier spell, so it's worth a try." She picked up her attribute and activated a magical technique, lifting all the exhausted participants into the air. Alma exclaimed in delight. "Wow." Millis, the youngest participant, said without opening her eyes. "Let them give her a bath." Alma was fired up by the idea and cheerfully asked, "How about going to the communal bath after the dorm?" Many immediately perked up at the suggestion. Millis asked Elria if she could join them. Alma remarked, since Millis invited her, she simply had to go. The sage let out a surprised breath and looked questioningly at her allies. Alma smiled and said, "I'll borrow the protagonist for a while." And now, recalling all this, the girl thought sadly that she had a lot on her mind, like their relationship, or that banner. Millis looked at her in confusion. The girl, noticing this look, asked, "What's wrong?" She replied, "Now that she thinks about it, Elria, is so unfair. Did she know that? Her hair is silky smooth. Her skin is soft and smooth too. Not only is she cute, her whole body is simply beautiful. Her voice, it's too loud." Elria was embarrassed by so many compliments from her friend and said in response that she wanted to discuss something with her. She wanted to give someone a gift. What, in her opinion, would be a good gift? Millis exclaimed happily. A gift for the protagonist, right? The sage was embarrassed and hastened to object. She never said anything of the sort. The girl replied, "Anyone can tell at a glance." She knew she radiated an aura of love for him. Elria blushed and cried out, "That's not true." Millis continued. Did she think she'd even shown it? Elria submerged herself face-deep in water and quietly said, "Still, she wants to give him a gift to celebrate their admission to the academy. But she'd never given anyone a gift before." Millis looked puzzled. She'd only met them today, so she didn't think she could give good advice. But how about giving him something he likes? The sage thought for a moment, then clarified. "Whetstones and oil?" Millis said with a smile. "I'm sure he'll be pleased." As a girl from the outskirts, she also enjoys caring for her tools. Elria made a mental note, though she'd been thinking about equipment and armor. Millis continued. But instead of consumables, she thought something more durable would be better. "It was a memory after all," the sage exclaimed. "Is that so?" the girl said. "But that's her opinion." Elria drawled, "I see." She couldn't think of anything. Millis asked in surprise, wasn't she giving up too quickly? The sage thought. Even though they'd known each other for over 50 years, adding her age from her past life, she was almost 200 years old. But this was too much of a predicament. Submerging her head, she said, "Too sad." Millis cried out her name in fear and begged her not to drown. She'd only met her today. Please let her think about the moments when Ryan was happy. Elria surfaced and asked, puzzled, when is he happy? He looks happy when he fights, the girl remarked in surprise. So he's addicted to battles? The sage countered. That's not true. When he fights her, he always laughs and seems to enjoy it. Yes, she wants to give him something that will make him laugh like he does at times like these. The girl smiled and thanked Millis. The girl was touched and rushed to her with a hug, saying she was a national treasure. She should cherish her. She was so envious of the protagonist. She would give her 100% of her support. Elria was surprised by such a reaction and couldn't breathe from the tight embrace Millis gave her. Meanwhile, the protagonist was waiting for Alma. She entered the office and apologized for the wait, adding that Elise's scolding had been so long. He responded rather sharply. Stop chatting. Where did they get the Altane banner? The girl replied, Altane is the name of a country, or something like that. He told her not to act stupid after waving her magic item like that. She countered, she's telling the truth. If anything, she wants to know why he immediately mistook the fabric for a banner. MC clarified, so it's not customary to perceive it as a banner? Alma answered that it was exactly as he said. That cloth was indeed intended for a specific banner, but only people who inherited the Kanos family name knew about it. Should he just tell her who he is? The protagonist became embarrassed and said, please forgive him, but he can't answer that question. However, she could ask anything except that. She could freely ask questions and find the answers herself. She clarified, he thought of something good, didn't he? He thought of a question. In other words, the choice was in Alma's hands. She could learn his identity from his answers. But on the other hand, if he could answer her questions without revealing anything, he could win her trust. The girl asked then, what was his opinion of methodical people? He replied that they were serious and diligent, and even if they were not pliable, they were not bad guys. If he had to choose someone as a subordinate, then such people are the most suitable. Alma said, I understand. Then, the next question. Why does he think the moon shines? So she asked him a few more questions which he answered. Finally, the girl said, the next question is the last one. He sarcastically remarked, are you sure about that? Alma became embarrassed and said, I'm sure he can answer her. After that, the girl addressed him as His Excellency, saluted, and asked if he remembered her name. He replied with a smile, there is only one person who addresses him as His Excellency, and not as a general. Saluting her too, he continued, isn't that right, Layat? The girl laughed, let go of her hand and said, he answered directly, as written in the memorandum. After a while, he asked if she was related to Layat. Alma replied, it's the name of her ancestor. He was the one who created that memorandum, and he died. He served His Excellency and was with him until the very end. The protagonist said that guy, he even left the memorandum for millennia. She laughed again and replied, it just shows how much her ancestor adored His Excellency. As agreed, she would not ask anything more, like how someone who lived millennia ago is still alive. He said they should leave it at that. That was the reason he wanted to talk. So she knows about Altine, right? The girl noted, as she said, she knew nothing of such a country. She could say the same about the banner. It was passed down along with the memorandum. It doesn't mention anything about Altine. He clarified, what about the hero or Rain Frieden? Alma said, technically, it's there, but it was discovered through magical research into elves and oral tradition. The protagonist thoughtfully noted, but nothing was mentioned in the memo. He thought Layat always addressed him as His Excellency, but sometimes he called him hero. But that wasn't mentioned in that memo. He'd said out loud that someone was deliberately trying to erase the hero's existence. The girl stared at him in surprise and noticed, even while manipulating a personal memo, he'd said, logically impossible. But in reality, irrational things happen. But why does this still exist among elves? Alma suggested, perhaps because of oral tradition? After all, elves are long-lived. They've always spread information without any medium, simply passing on history by word of mouth. MC asked if elves and humans weren't very close millennia ago. Back then, it was considered important enough to be passed on orally. As she said, they wouldn't have told humans about it without thinking. At that very time, even though they were no longer around, the oral tradition continued to exist, like a fairy tale. Please, let her tell him from now on if anything happens, okay? He's sure she knows much more about history, right? She was indignant, of course, but he really had the nerve to give orders to someone of such rank. He smiled and replied, everything is fine, right? After all, her ancestors respected and loved him as their excellency. Alma mused, by the way, is it possible that Elria is just like him? The protagonist remarked, he'll leave that to her imagination. The girl cursed and said, she just started a fight with a real sage. The protagonist pointed at her and exclaimed, well, he's counting on her. Alma saluted him again and said, he can leave this to her. Several days passed after Alma's conversation. The situational exams began the day after tomorrow. Millis turned to her allies over breakfast and asked if they had plans for the day off before the exams. Weasel said he wanted to go home and take care of his magic items. MC told her that even though Elria had praised her for her magic control, she still needed to work on her combat skills. She should go and train on her own. She exclaimed indignantly, he's a monster. She just wanted to have some fun. As women, they're a species that can't live without a reward. She turned to Elria and asked, isn't that right? The sage was fast asleep at the table, her head thrown back. Weasel remarked that it was hard to believe she was sleeping so soundly. The protagonist said she was researching magic or something. She always slept later than him, and he was a little worried. Millis exclaimed, maybe this is normal? Knowing her, maybe she's just making an effort as the sage's heir, or maybe she's just doing this to leave something worthy behind. He asked, does she know anything? The girl replied, more importantly, hasn't he been too friendly with Alma lately? Weasel added, she even calls him Excellency. He replied sheepishly, it's a nickname. At that moment, Ferris, passing by, said dismissively, what a noisy peasant. It was annoying enough that everyone flattered her, and now she was causing a ruckus in the cafe. Millis bowed to him and said she was terribly sorry. He chuckled. Do commoners even know how to apologize? When she apologizes to someone of higher status, she should bow, burying her forehead in the ground. The girl responded indignantly. She'll apologize for the noise, but there's no reason to go that far. Ferris muttered in bewilderment. What? Did she really tell him that? He grabbed the hilt of his sword and cursed her. What a stupid commoner. His comrades tried to stop him by calling out to him, but Ferris, ignoring them, continued yelling at Millis. Status isn't the only difference between them. To be worthy of using the great magic of a sage, she lacks the intelligence for it. He extended his hand with the weapon and activated his magical power. The protagonist rushed forward and shielded the girl with himself, dispelling Ferris' magical attack with one swing. The boy gasped in surprise. What was that? The protagonist addressed him, calling him a boy. Ferris flared up and arrogantly shouted, he's a boy? How dare he say that to him? A proud member of the Verminen family. MC said, there's nothing wrong with calling a boy a boy. Does he realize what he just said? Then he grabbed his head and squeezed it. Ferris rudely told him to shut his mouth. He was just trying to teach this commoner some manners. The protagonist patiently said, he's a boy, and he doesn't understand, so he'll explain it to him. Magic is something that has claimed many lives. So, possessing it and using it on someone means he's willing to be killed by someone. He said something about being worthy of using the sage's great magic. Unlike him, that sage risked everything to cast spells. If he wants to talk about himself, then go and achieve something. Don't count on his family's glory. If he's not satisfied, then stop sulking and show his proud side. With these words, he pushed him away so hard that Ferris flew off and fell to the floor. The protagonist continued. If he's incapable of this, he's the one who should know his place. All the students watched them with bated breath. Ferris, sitting on the floor, angrily called him a damn barbarian. The MC sighed and said, first a commoner, now a barbarian. Life teaches him nothing, and he deserves punishment. With these words, he snatched his opponent's sword and snapped it in half. The guy gasped when he saw this and exclaimed, his magic item? The protagonist threw him the two halves and said, consider them even. Now let him get out of here. Ferris went berserk. His companions tried to calm him down and lead him outside. His friend said he was sure the Lord wouldn't notice if they taped him up. After Ferris was led away by his friends, the protagonist turned to Millis and asked if she was okay. The girl gasped and replied, yes, thanks to him. After that, she jumped up to him and asked him to please let him do all these cool things when Elria wakes up. He replied, don't let her freak out for no reason. Weasel, looking at Elria, said, she slept through all this fuss. Millis whispered in the girl's ear, she can't sleep here. Elria rubbed her eyes and chuckled in surprise. After that, she glanced around at everyone, got up from the table, and suddenly rushed to MC, hugging him. He stared at her in amazement. Weasel was surprised. Is she sleeping on him? Millis was touched. Oh my god, she was so cute. The protagonist thought, is Elria like this even in her sleep? He turned to Weasel, apologized, and said that they would leave first. The guy replied he understood, let him leave the cleaning to him. Millis said, yes, good job. He said goodbye to them, picked Elria up in his arms and left. Walking down the street, he said, oh my god, he doesn't know what Elria does, but please don't let her exhaust herself. She muttered something in her sleep. He listened and realized she said she wanted him to be happy. The protagonist said in surprise, him? The girl, without opening her eyes, answered yes, just like they were before. After that, she opened her eyes and looked at him. Then, realizing she was in his arms, the girl shuddered and exclaimed, twitching. He said, it's dangerous. It's okay. Let her sit still. Elria sheepishly replied that she understood. After a while, she said, she thinks she needs to try a little harder. He replied, then let her do it in moderation. She noted that he wouldn't ask why. MC said he didn't think she was hiding anything from him or doing anything dangerous. As long as he was around, she could relax and do whatever she wanted. Hugging him, the girl sheepishly thanked Ryan. The next day, Alma told the students that, from actual combat to reactions to various situations, a situational exam determines each student's grade. The exam will take place in a special location where all 8 classes can gather. This location is managed by the Academy, a huge forest area. Beyond this fence is a dangerous zone inhabited by monsters. Monsters are easily born in places saturated with mana. Then, after a long period of mating with other beasts, their numbers and habitat continue to grow, even now. For today's exam, they will enter a zone of at least rank E. It is home to many monsters, from small to medium-sized. The teachers have already dealt with the medium-sized monsters. But this place remains dangerous. Their carelessness and pride can hurt them here. They can also die. Let them never forget this. The examiner said, now, he will explain the nature of the exam. Their scenario is to rescue people who have mistakenly strayed into a dangerous zone. Several dummies are located within the danger zone. They must find, retrieve, and return them within a certain time. Once they have retrieved them and exited, the exam will be over. As they might have guessed, the more dummies they bring back, the higher their score will be. One of the students asked if the situational exam was meant to evaluate them individually. Should they prioritize their own assessment and act alone? Alma replied that all she would tell them was, no comment. The most important thing in this exam was achieving the goal. In other words, ensuring rescue. So working together to rescue makes sense, right? The explanation was over. They had 30 minutes left before it began. Until then, they could discuss everything among themselves. The protagonist turned to his allies and suggested they decide what they would do, okay? Weasel replied that, regarding that, he and Millis would be dead weight. He thought it would be better if they split up. The protagonist countered, no, Edris wasn't involved. He needed their help. Millis exclaimed in confusion, but he was on a completely different level. Did he understand that? He replied that the goal of the exam was rescue, and the dummies couldn't move. But what if there were people in their place? Millis tensely wondered if someone would be really scared. Weasel said no. They were just wounded and therefore couldn't move. MC said they were both right. They needed to calm the frightened people down and tend to their wounds. Plus, they'd have to carry them to safety, and doing all that alone would be incredibly difficult. Especially since he can't use magic, he can't take care of the dummies. So this task is impossible for him. Weasel pointed out, of course, those dummies are also magical items. He wouldn't be surprised if the examiners used some kind of mechanism. Millis exclaimed, so there's a chance they won't be able to take them until they give them first aid? It's also possible there are hidden dummies, and it might take a lot of people to find them, right? The protagonist said yes. That's why he'll handle the monsters. Weasel will transport them with a magical item, and Millis will have to deal with the mechanism. In his opinion, this is the perfect strategy. Elria approached and looked at him in surprise and silence. Millis noted, looking at the girl, that even for her, doing all this alone would be difficult. Elria spoke up, but the director ordered her to do everything herself. Millis exclaimed in surprise, why? The sage replied that it would be hard to judge others while she was around. Millis gasped and admitted that her magic was amazing after all. Elria said she agreed with Ryan's idea. At that moment, Ferris chuckled sarcastically and said, apparently, they all misunderstood. The protagonist exclaimed, the boy looks cheerful today. Ferris shouted in irritation, don't call him that. Their age difference isn't that big. Did he understand? MC asked mockingly. So why did he rush off and come here? He replied that, in his understanding, the goal of the exam isn't just rescuing the dummies. There's another goal. Elria clarified in surprise. Another goal? Ferris exclaimed. That's right. Instructor Alma said there were no medium-sized monsters in the danger zone, but she didn't mention a large monster. Whoever can subdue this monster will receive the highest score. The protagonist was confused. What was he saying? Millis said they needed to leave. Ferris was indignant. He wasn't finished yet. Weasel told him that if he thought about it logically, he'd realize they didn't even know if they could handle it, so there was no way they'd do something like that. Ferris mockingly drawled, it's okay if he wants to think that way. He has the power to deal with a large monster. With that, the boy showed his magic attribute. The protagonist noted that this magic item was very short. The boy responded irritably, well, he broke it for him. His family's engineers managed to fix it yesterday. MC said, they must have good skills. He shouldn't overexert himself and break it again. Valk bowed to Ryan, apologizing for her friend's behavior. Lucas tried to drag the boy away. Ferris angrily promised he'd make him cry. Did he understand that? The allies watched as the restless boy was led away by his comrades. The protagonist crossed his arms and said that despite being disgraced in front of everyone, he still had the courage to be rude to him. Elria smiled and said that, after all, his family had many achievements in subduing monsters. They must have put a lot of effort into it. She familiarly ruffled his hair and said, it's almost time to go. He and the others should be more careful. In response, the protagonist ruffled her hair and extended a hand, and she did the same. Since she was alone, she should be more careful. The girl smiled shyly, clearly pleased by his concern. Millis, perplexed, told Weasel that the two were flirting before the exam. The boy replied that since they were strong and had free reign, she should leave them alone and ignore them. After a while, the allies set out. MC eliminated the first monster they encountered with a kick. Afterward, he told his surprised allies that, although the enemy was large, it was quite weak. Millis noted with amazement that this was coming from the one who had knocked him down with a single kick. Ryan spoke up, but he was still trying to restrain himself so as not to leave a trace of blood. Weasel said that the smell of blood could attract other monsters, complicating the rescue. Millis exhaled convulsively and asked the protagonist, There are so many monsters here. Do you think Edris is okay? He replied, of course. She could probably defeat them all with first-tier spells. She could also defeat the average person single-handedly using martial arts techniques. The girl remarked that she couldn't believe someone as sweet and fragile as she could be capable of such a thing. He thought that over the course of a millennium of peace and tranquility, specialized combat magic, fencing, and martial arts had ceased to develop. Weasel remarked that he thought Ryan's moves were interesting. He exclaimed in surprise, really? Then he'll show him some more. Weasel also likes fighting at close range. It works just as well on people. Weasel replied, well then, he'll gladly accept his offer and listen to his recommendations. Millis declared that kicking and hitting people like that was a bit wrong. MC told the guy to just watch. He might be able to move differently if he learns some self-defense techniques. Suddenly, Weasel exclaimed, stop. There seems to be a cave up ahead. The protagonist asked if he saw any monsters nearby. The guy replied, no, the surrounding area is empty. He said, okay then. That means there's a dummy inside the cave. Millis remarked in surprise, how can he be so sure of that? The protagonist activated his acceleration and said, he'll say it this way, that she got hurt while running from the monster and wants to find a safe place. Mannequins aren't lying around everywhere, so it's safe to assume they're in a similar situation. The allies were also affected by his acceleration and quickly began approaching the cave. Millis said, I see. Weasel said, the cave is close. Stopping at the entrance, MC said, he'll go ahead. Weasel should keep an eye on the situation. Millis should support them. The allies replied that they understood everything. After a while, Ryan, shining a flashlight into the cave, exclaimed, bingo, there are 5 of them. Millis noted in surprise, so many. He replied, according to the script, they fled in groups, right? He'll leave the rest to them. With that, he continued on. Weasel activated his vision goggles and said, he's detected several mana patches. He thinks they'll disperse if 2 or more people are involved. Millis noticed everything, just as Ryan said. Millis crouched near the mannequins and activated her skill. Weasel asked, what about those mannequins? She replied, she thinks they are too. The girl placed her hand on the magic circle, and suddenly a system sound was heard. Millis recoiled from the mannequin in fear and screamed in surprise. The protagonist anxiously asked, are they all right? Weasel covered Millis's mouth with his hand and answered, absolutely. It seemed the mechanism in the mannequins had activated. Suddenly, Millis, seeing the numbers on the mannequin's body, exclaimed, has the timer started? The guy remarked, thinking this mannequin was mortally wounded, and the timer was showing how long they had to save it. She hastily said, then we need to heal it quickly. Finally, Elria recognized her healing magic. She activated the magic circle under the mannequin and began healing. The system sound rang out again. Millis screamed again in surprise. Weasel spoke irritably, louder than the dummy. The girl became embarrassed and apologized. Then, with tears in her eyes, she continued, but if it's an injury, then her healing magic should work. The protagonist suggested, maybe it was a matter of first aid. How about checking the wound, or the dummy? Weasel guessed, so the mana flow accumulation is the wounds? Millis exclaimed, first aid in 5 minutes? Wow, what's that? MC shouted, tell her to calm down. He'll tell her what to do, so she shouldn't worry and focus. Tell Weasel to hurry and check the mana accumulation. The guy answered, he understood, and began the task. Ryan told the girl, first, the wound, the mana accumulation, have him conjure an antidote and use a cooling bandage. The boy responded, dispelling the mana accumulation. Millis clarified, then, you need to compress the wound like this, right? The protagonist, looking at the approaching monsters, replied, before that, have her use a cloth, so he doesn't bite off his tongue. If he's exhausted from the wound, then he's on the verge of death. While destroying the monsters, he continued, first, have her try to stop the bleeding. If the wound is on the thigh, have her raise it so that it's above the heart. After that, please have her check the open wound more closely and use healing magic. The girl quickly did everything he said. Weasel, examining the dummy, remarked, good. Apparently the mechanism has been resolved. Everything is fine now. Millis threw her head back, sighed heavily, and exclaimed, thank God. MC praised her. Great job. She thanked him with tears in her eyes. Then he turned to Weasel and said, well done too. The guy countered, no, he just checked the mana pool, that's all. They'd made it thanks to Millis. Ryan said he'd helped her emotionally. His role was also very important. Weasel asked, did he see people on the brink of death? The protagonist looked at him in bewilderment. He continued, his instructions so precise. The way he explained everything made it feel as if he'd seen a real person dying. The protagonist admitted it was all true. He'd seen those who were saved and those who were beyond saving. Even though they were just mannequins, their work was commendable. That's why he was grateful to them for saving the mannequins. Weasel was about to reply, but at that moment, Millis screamed again. MC, startled, exclaimed, stop yelling over every little thing, she said in a trembling voice. Someone is coming toward them, carrying someone. The guys looked closer, and the protagonist, surprised, noticed, is that Fairs and his 2 henchmen? Weasel activated his vision skill and anxiously said, hurry up and call those 3. He thought they were seriously injured, and there was something moving in the forest. It was indeed Fairs and his friends, whom he was dragging along. He himself looked very battered. The protagonist rushed to meet them and shouted at them to go into the cave right now. It was safe there. Ferris stared at him in surprise and said, "Is that him?" The protagonist was amazed, thinking he'd been dragging them along the whole way. Once they were safe, he asked Ferris to explain what happened. Were they attacked by a monster? The guy clutched his head and said in bewilderment, "I just don't know." He didn't know what kind of monster it was. He never imagined one like that would be here. At that moment, Weasel approached them and told Ryan that, in his opinion, things were bad. He didn't confirm this visually, but it was definitely different from the other monsters in this forest. The protagonist rushed toward the exit, nearly knocking over his ally. Weasel called out to him anxiously. The protagonist shouted for him and Millis to take the two and carry them deeper into the cave. He crouched down next to Ferris and addressed him. He said in fear, "That thing, it was attacking them." Suddenly, a huge monster appeared from behind the trees and let out a terrifying roar. The allies barely managed to move to safety. Millis exclaimed in fear, "What the hell is that?" Weasel said in confusion, "It seems it can't get any further, but it's only a matter of time." MC asked Ferris where they started the fight with that monster. The guy exclaimed in irritation, "He's wrong. It's true. He thought the academy would have something prepared, so he scouted around a bit. When they actually encountered the monster, he froze in horror. Valk and Lucas had covered and protected him, and then everything had gone wrong. He was so sorry. With tears in his eyes, he continued, because he tried to do something unnecessary, because he was trying to find a large monster. All of this had happened. The protagonist stroked his head soothingly and asked why he was crying. He had managed to escape against all odds. He hadn't abandoned his friends or fled in despair. He could be proud of that. After that, he turned to Weasel and said that after he left the cave, he would need to cast a barrier. Ferris exclaimed in bewilderment. He was going to fight him? That was impossible. That thing was very dangerous. He had noticed. Magic immunity, right? His allies and Ferris stared at him in confusion. He continued not to worry. He wouldn't die. He was simply going to win, like the hero he was. He remembered 1,000 years ago when many adventurers had tried to defeat a certain monster, but to no avail. The protagonist approached it alone. A man running past shouted at him. He might die if he gets close to this thing. He'd warned him, hadn't he? The protagonist walked toward the monster without stopping. Approaching closer, he turned to the enemy and asked if he could handle his sword. Back then, he, a young man, had single-handedly saved Altane and Vigalt from danger, and he'd been granted the title of hero. And now, in the present, he faced it again. The monster tried to push its way into the cave, causing everything to shake and cracks to form in the floor. Millis hiccuped in fear. Weasel was also quite frightened. The protagonist turned toward the enemy and said, "This monster is called the Armored Dragon. It is the mage's main enemy. It feeds on ore veins like gold and magical ores, which grant it the ability to repel magic." Ferris asked, perplexed how he knew this. He replied sheepishly, "Well, a lot happens, he just knows." Ferris exclaimed, "What? Still, this is too reckless. They should wait for help from the academy." MC noted, "Not necessarily the academy. Elria could easily handle this if she came, but they didn't have time to wait." He turned to Weasel and asked if he brought a magical item that could create a barrier, right? The guy replied that he had a couple of such things, but was he sure? After that, Ryan turned to Millis and said, "He was asking. Let her continue healing the wounded. She can handle it. He knows it." The girl, trembling with fear, looked at Lucas and Valk and tried to control her emotions, clutching her attribute tighter. After that, she said, "She can handle it. She will definitely save them. So please, let him send this monster into the stratosphere." Rain, rushing towards the enemy, replied, "He will." Jumping out of the cave, he struck the enemy right in the face, causing the dragon to topple to the ground. The protagonist exclaimed, "He's tougher than he looks." He never realized this, since he used a sword. The monster rose to its feet and let out its attack roar. The protagonist continued, "He will forgive him, but he barely remembers him. They are all weak compared to the sage." The dragon looked at him in bewilderment. MC, using a boost, flew to its head with lightning speed, and again struck the enemy with all his might with his bare hand. The dragon fell on its back again, its paws raised. Rain, maintaining a fighting stance, said he hoped to break its neck, but it looks like it won't be so easy. The monster leaped to its feet again and increased its roar, which now sounded slightly different. The protagonist, noticing the tremors, exclaimed in surprise, "A shaking?" Looking closer, he grinned. "So, reinforcements?" More dragons were rushing through the forest to join their kin. The protagonist wondered what he should do to ensure his allies' safe escape. It would be painful if he had to fight them all barehanded. The enemy towered proudly over him and made a menacing warning lunge. At that moment, Elria ran up to MC and apologized for being late. Alma told her to bring the students, as they had spotted several unknown monsters. She went there and discovered 10 armored dragons. The academy was short-staffed, so its restrictions had been lifted. He replied that this was no good for them. Millis and the others were in the cave now. Could she lead them away? The girl activated the intercom and asked Millis if she could hear her. The girl shouted her name and asked if she was okay. Elria replied that she was fine and was glad she was okay too. She was going to transport them. She can tell Weasel to maintain this barrier. Millis replied that she understood. Elria smiled and remarked, "Excellent, she was a good girl." After that, her instructions carried out, the girl activated the teleporter and transported her allies and the rescue to safety. After that, she told Ryan that everyone from their class was now safe. The protagonist, peering into the distance, noted in surprise, she dragged them away along with the cave. Elria noted that she didn't want to hear that from someone who tried to defeat an armored dragon with his bare hands. At that moment, the intercom activated, through which Alma, wildly confused, asked, "Did she send an entire cave here?" The girl replied, "Should they put it down like the rest of her classmates?" Alma replied, "Everyone who took the exam today is here. Some of them are injured, but nothing fatal. All the teachers have already returned." Elria said, "Excellent. Then she will destroy all the armored dragons in this area along with Rain, so please let her protect the rest of the students." Alma barked, "Let them stand still. She never said she could destroy a monster of this level." Elria turned off the intercom and asked the protagonist, "How about giving it his all?" He repeated, "His all?" He was thinking about taking them all out in an instant. She noticed, right? That's why she was going to help him do it. Activating her magic power, the girl added, "She's always thought about this, how to make sure he can give it his all. With her magic, she's sure he can handle it." With these words, Elria created a magical weapon for him and announced that it was his gift to celebrate his entry into the academy. He looked at the sword in his hands in confusion, then burst into laughter and declared, "A gift, of course." The girl asked, confused, why he was laughing. Wiping away tears of laughter, he replied, he thought it was just like her to think of giving him a sword forged with magic. Only she could do that. Elria said sheepishly. She thought it would make him happy, so she chose such a gift. The protagonist, examining the weapon, exclaimed in admiration, "Happy? That's not enough to describe his feelings. Her magic, always by his side in battle, surely she could withstand his mana." The girl replied that now that she thought about it, this was the first time they'd fought like this. They were together now, he said with a smile. "Yes. A united front, 1,000 years in the future." Ryan then looked at the monster and added that since he'd received such a wonderful gift, he was going to show her its true power. Elria stared at him in bewilderment. He, tightening his grip on the weapon, said, "Even though it's been a long time, his body never forgets. Let her watch carefully. That's what it means to be serious." He swung his sword and cut a huge deep gash in the ground, resembling a trench. He shouldered the weapon and exclaimed, "Like this!" Elria said in confusion, "That was amazing." Suddenly the sword vanished as unexpectedly as it had appeared. He looked at his hands in amazement and told the girl he was very sorry. She replied sadly that it wasn't a sword you could always use. He smiled, patted her head and said, "Don't worry." He was very happy. He felt great when he could finally give it his all. But he had much more fun fighting her. Elria laughed joyfully and replied, "She did too." After a while, Alma flew up to them. Looking down at the deep, gaping trench from above, she exclaimed, "That's it. Elise will faint when she hears about this." When she joined her allies, she was irritated. She declared that she had given Elria permission to use her power. He'd done a good job pulverizing the monsters, but who gave them permission to change the terrain? Both the protagonist and the girl knelt down and spoke in unison. Things got a bit hilarious in the middle, so they got a little carried away. Alma noticed, I see. She understood what they were getting at. At that moment, a system window appeared, in which an image of Eliza appeared. She screamed hysterically at her assistant, asking her to please disagree with them. Then she turned to her allies and exclaimed in bewilderment, "How the hell did they just demolish the exam area?" Elria raised her hand, just like in school, and replied, "She created a sword out of magic." The protagonist repeated the gesture and added, "He then used it to smash everything." Elria exclaimed, "Next time she'll make a sword that can be used more than once." Eliza exclaimed in confusion, "They know she'll report this to the higher-ups, right? Please, let them show a little compassion." She then turned to Alma and said, "What about the reinforcement reports she sent her anyway?" The girl replied, "Nothing yet. But it seemed a part had been torn off. Somehow, that monster had managed to reduce her magic damage by half. According to witnesses, almost all their magic was either reflected or dispelled. Not only were there problems with magic in that area, but her magic had also become unstable. Even her death squad's movements were slowed by that monster, and it had easily destroyed them." Eliza spoke in confusion. "Is that so? He was able to influence even a 10th tier spell. This is very bad. Let her send another call for reinforcements for now, then she'll find a specialist to investigate." Alma replied, "Well, it's worth trying to ask the students again." Suddenly, she exclaimed, "Fairs." The girl turned to him and remarked, she heard he encountered it and almost engaged in combat. The boy replied, "Yes." While exploring, they encountered an unknown monster. Valk and Lucas were with him. They tried to protect him, and therefore they were injured. Judging by its appearance, he realized it was some kind of dragon. He erased his scent by walking through Hullwalker grass, and to avoid detection, he burned several trees. Then he decided to bring the two back to the cave to await help. Alma patted him on the shoulder and remarked, "Good job. He made the best decisions, even in such a dangerous situation." Fairs lowered his head in embarrassment. Then Alma turned to her allies and said they should all head to the temporary rest area. They would not be evaluating the results of this test. Regarding this incident, she asked them not to speak of it to outsiders. Millis asked, puzzled. What was she talking about? The instructor said the monsters in the area had been dealt with in advance. All the school instructors had been monitoring the area, but no one had noticed these monsters. The teachers had already dealt with the medium-sized monsters, Weasel said thoughtfully. In other words, these dragons appeared out of nowhere, right? Alma looked at him in surprise and continued, so, they need to think it over and conduct a thorough investigation into this matter. The protagonist wondered if the armored dragon's invasion had been a simple incident, perhaps a third party, or perhaps the culprit was inside the school. Alma said, just let them keep it quiet until the investigation is complete. Everyone except those two can go free. After that, she looked at the protagonist and Elria with irritation. He said, they're both students too. Does she understand that? She should let them go home already. Elria added, she wants something sour for dinner tonight. Alma replied, let them go. Spinning around, she grabbed them and dragged them along. Millis and Weasel watched in surprise. Stepping aside, Alma asked MC if she could talk to Elria about this. He replied that, in his opinion, Elria knew more about armored dragons than he did. The girl agreed. That's true. They were very difficult to deal with back then. Alma thoughtfully remarked, so that monster is called an armored dragon, right? The protagonist was surprised. This was the first time she'd heard of it. The instructor replied that, at the very least, they'd never fought a monster that could affect magic. More importantly, Ferris said he knew nothing about it, not just the monsters they'd exterminated. His family collects all kinds of information on all the monsters in every area. In this country, they have the most information on monsters. After thinking for a moment, Alma turned to Elria and asked if she should address her with respect, as is proper. The girl answered sheepishly, let's keep it simple. That would be fine with her. The instructor remarked. Then could she tell her what an armored dragon is? Elria replied, it's a dragon-like monster that feeds on minerals. These minerals form the creature's shell. Typically, it's not strong enough to repel strong magic. But if they can even dispel magic, then just like 1,000 years ago, the chances that someone deliberately fed them magic ore are quite high. Alma spoke in confusion, feeling less and less understanding. According to history, there are monsters capable of influencing magic. She knows about them. But in their time, such creatures no longer exist. Elria asked in surprise. Not anymore. The instructor explained that due to the threat of magic, they were all hunted to extinction. In other words, armored dragons shouldn't exist in this era. Sometime later, the allies headed to the student camp. Their friends greeted them joyfully. Millis exclaimed, welcome back. Weasel said, apparently the conversation had been long. The protagonist turned to Elria and said he thought about it a bit, thinking he thought these two should be told about themselves. She looked at him shyly, then smiled and replied, I understand, I'd been thinking the same thing. Millis told Weasel she'd go get them some food. The guy replied, okay. After a while, when the allies sat down at the table, Millis remarked that it felt like they were on a hike. She was so glad they were both okay. Elria smiled, patted her on the head, and thanked her for worrying about them. Weasel mentioned Ferris's companions, by the way. They both survived thanks to Millis's healing. As soon as he said this, the scion of the great family himself began approaching them. MC thought irritably, just remembered him. Ferris addressed Millis, calling her a commoner. She thought in surprise. That voice. Turning around, she exclaimed, what? Ferris, struggling to find the right words, said that it wasn't because of him that Valk and Lucas were saved. He'd come to thank her. Then he silently turned and left. His allies stared after him in surprise. Millis, in astonishment, could barely say, aha! The protagonist propped his head on his hand and smiled faintly. A few days later, early in the morning, he entered Elria's room and told her to wait a second. He told her anything but that. Stumbling to his feet, he dressed, stretched, and began shaking the girl, telling her to get up already. Don't let her fall asleep again. She only clutched the pillow tighter and said sleepily, I still want to sleep. I can't get up, he said firmly. If she's late, Alicia won't just be furious. She'll call off their engagement. Does she understand that? In response, Elria asked him to hug her. The protagonist asked if he could carry her on his back instead. The girl objected. No, she wants a hug. He sheepishly said, just let her look at the time. Elria turned to him and looked at him sleepily. He knelt down, held out his arms to her, and told her to come to him. She threw herself into his arms with a smile. After a short while, MC said, he'll leave her uniform here, so hurry up and change. She started putting on her blouse, but he turned away, embarrassed. The girl dejectedly said, her blouse. He asked, blindfolding himself. What happened? Elria replied, the buttons don't match. Adjusting her sleeve, she added, I think this will do. MC, sweating, suggested trying again. She looked at his blindfold in surprise, walked up to him and said, let him do it. He'd help her? He seemed so embarrassed he could see her right through the blindfold. Grabbing the edges of her blouse, he quickly buttoned all the buttons with a quiet cry. Elria said in confusion, he's amazing, just like a tailor. After a while, carrying her on his back through the city, he muttered, he made it. When the protagonist carried her into class on his back, his classmates surrounded him, wished him good morning, and began vying with each other to ask, is it true that he defeated a huge dragon during the exam? What's more, he also single-handedly protected others, right? Please let him tell more about it. The protagonist spoke in confusion. Who told them about that? One of the girls said, Ferris. When everyone was discussing what happened with those dragons on the ground, he said he was the one who managed to defeat them. MC looked at Ferris, who was sitting silently at his desk, in confusion. and turned away when he saw him looking at him. Out loud, the protagonist asked his classmates if they could talk about this another time. Class was about to start. Weasel wished him good morning and noted that they were late today. Millis, looking at Elria, asked in surprise, "Is she not herself today?" The protagonist replied, "Yes, she is. Today it's even worse than usual." Elria only pressed herself closer to him. He sat her down at her desk, stroked her head, and told her to wake up already. They were already in class. She hugged his hand and asked why he was so close. MC replied, "It's not him, it's her." Elria, realizing she was clinging to him, pulled away from him in horror and apologized. He, not expecting such a reaction, told her not to worry about it. It wasn't the first or second time. Elria, blushing to the roots of her hair, exclaimed, "Not the first or second." Rain answered in bewilderment, "That's right. Usually, she comes to her senses by the time they're already in class." She cursed in confusion and asked, what the hell was she doing? The protagonist said, "And she falls back asleep after she gets up. She strokes his head while she's still half asleep. She comes out of the wardrobe in her underwear." The girl was incredibly embarrassed and attacked him with her fists. At that moment, Millis told her to rest assured. She covered Weasel's ears so he wouldn't hear anything. Elria turned sharply to her and shyly exclaimed her name. The girl covered Weasel's ears, and the boy looked confused. The protagonist was also embarrassed by what was happening. After this, Millis removed her hands from Weasel's head and said, "But even so, the two of them flirt a lot in their free time, right?" Weasel asked in confusion. "Isn't flirting in private normal?" The protagonist asked thoughtfully. Were they doing anything resembling flirting? Elria looked around fearfully, afraid that someone might overhear them. Millis said she couldn't understand either of them. Weasel added that he was sure they were observing moderation, because it's good for married couples to have a great relationship. Elria sheepishly countered, "They're not married, they're engaged," he replied. "Just let them not sync up at such odd moments." Elria looked at the MC and said, "They have something to tell them today, so let them not go home right away, okay?" After school, the allies remained in the classroom. The protagonist said, "Okay, he wants to tell them something. First, he's a human, the people of all time called a hero." Elria added, "And she's an elf from Vigalt called a sage. They were reborn after a millennium, many events occurred, and now they're engaged." Weasel adjusted his glasses and said, "I see. Basically, they're convinced now." Millis added, "They understand." The protagonist and Elria stared at the allies in surprise. Weasel asked why they were surprised. MC replied, "He thought they wouldn't believe something so strange." Millis remarked, "If anything, they can now be sure they know the reason." Weasel added, he agreed with Millis. Instead of them both possessing absurd powers for some incomprehensible reason, he would no longer believe their powers were the result of something more concrete. Millis turned to MC and clarified, "So he's a hero, right?" He replied, "A millennium ago, there was a country called Altain, constantly at war with Vigalta." Elria added, "The only person capable of matching the sage of Vigalta was a hero named Rein." Millis remarked, "If he were equal to the sage, then his name should have been preserved in history, right?" The protagonist said they searched, but couldn't find anything about Altain, let alone the wars with it. It wasn't simply rewritten, it was as if it had been erased from history. So, they're trying to find clues in aspects other than history, but they're short-handed. Weasel noted, after all, Blanche's family is old. His family has a long history of supplying the royal family with magical equipment, so he'll try to find something. Millis said she seems like a very ordinary person. Is there anything she can do for the two of them? The protagonist answered, the place where she lived with the sheep. Noaberg was the land of Altain. She exclaimed in surprise. Was her village prosperous back then, by any chance? He said it was a secluded region in his time, known only to a handful of nomads. Millis slammed her fists on the table and exclaimed, "So her home was nothing more than a rural area for 1,000 years? Elria said, confused. "She thinks it's a nice, isolated place." Millis, in a theatrically tragic voice, asked her not to call it an isolated place. Otherwise, her heart wouldn't take it. Elria hastened to explain. She'd misunderstood. It looked like a secluded area where elves lived. There's a good chance the information is still passed down as a tradition. MC said he'd like them both to help them and tell them if they learn anything. Weasel remarked he's glad they trust them, but obviously, they can only talk about this with trusted people. Millis said, what she means is that it's hard to believe that a person who lived a millennium ago was reincarnated. Weasel continued. Also, if someone tries to change history like that, there's a chance they'll become their target, since they know about it. Millis's eyes widened in confusion. She hadn't thought of that. The protagonist said, that's why he hesitated to tell them about it. Elria said, but that means they just have to protect them, and that's no problem. Millis replied dejectedly, these words are reassuring. Weasel noted, he agrees. There's nowhere safer than near them. The protagonist said, besides the two of them, Alma also knows about this. Her ancestor was one of his comrades who used that banner. Weasel exclaimed in surprise. Instructor Alma? A banner? A flag? Then, does that mean that magical equipment is from the last millennium? Millis grabbed Elria's hands and exclaimed, so Alma is their comrade's descendant? That's simply unbelievable. The girl clarified, okay, MC said they all know now. He's sorry to drag them into this, but can he count on their help? Weasel replied, don't worry. He's also curious about his power. Millis exclaimed with a smile. This is a request from her only friends. Let them leave this to her. she'll help and lift their spirits. Elria folded her hands in prayer and thanked her allies. At that moment, the door opened. Alma walked in, and turning to the protagonist and Elria exclaimed, "There they are!" He asked in surprise. "What's wrong?" The girl tensely replied, "The director is calling them." "What are those smirks about?" Sometime later, walking down the hallway, Alma said she and Elise had attended a meeting to discuss how they would handle the incident, but nothing had been resolved. Approaching the principal's office door, she knocked on it and informed Eliza that she had brought a couple. When the three entered, Eliza fell to her knees, banged her head on the floor, and exclaimed, she deeply regretted her actions. Alma asked in surprise, "Why is she bowing? She knows she's the principal, right?" MC and Elria froze in confusion. She exclaimed that she had told them everything. They might have overdone it a bit, but they helped evacuate the students and faculty. But the royal family and the Mage Association refused to honor them. MC said he thought it was the right decision, which surprised her. He explained to her that defeating a special rank monster with a single blow, when even special rank magic had gone through difficulties fighting it, was quite difficult to imagine. She couldn't reveal the information to the public for sure. Even if they had helped in the evacuation, let's not forget that they were the ones who destroyed the environment. That's why he had no objections to this decision. She vigorously slammed her hand on the floor, thanking him for his explanation and conclusion. The royal family and the Mage Association can no longer ignore his power, but as long as the source of his power remains unknown, they cannot officially confirm how strong he is. Alma Canos, a special rank mage, will investigate the details of his power and judge. Also, regarding him, all special rank mages have decided to postpone it. She resisted them to the end because it was the same as not acknowledging him. But Rain told her that he understood everything, and she exclaimed that she hadn't actually finished speaking yet. Elria raised her hand and said that she also had something to say, and she exclaimed that if Rain failed because of this, the Caldwell family could suffer. But she wasn't talking about that at all. She declared that she also wanted to fight a special level mage, and the headmistress hit her forehead on the floor in despair, exclaiming, "Why?" Even with her limiters, she was more than strong. She thought they could achieve this if they told them that in the future, she would become a special level mage. Alma suggested they leave, since Eliza was already in a really bad state, after which she closed the doors and turned to them with a smile, asking, "Everything went well, right?" MC smiled and said that now they had a good excuse to meet and exchange information. And she, proudly rubbing her nose, said that her ancestors served them, and she, after all, was their descendant. Instead of talking in the hallway, she had a place where they could talk privately. They went into the room, where they had already managed to have a few drinks and play board games. Rain told her that he was impressed that she could be so relaxed in the presence of her students. She said that everything was fine, it was just juice. After which she turned to Elria and asked if it was her turn. She made her move and asked Rain to tell her about his current abilities, to which he replied that he simply ate and trained. And that's how it all turned out. She disappointedly noted that it was a mistake to ask him, and then asked Elria what she thought of him. She replied that Rain's magical powers were truly extraordinary. For some strange reason, he gained a unique magical power, and she thinks that his entire body was strengthened by magic, which is why he became stronger. She clarified, in other words, his endurance is just a side effect. She replied that at that moment, she saw how magical power flowed from his body, poured into the sword and struck with it. It can't even be called magic or a spell. You can look at it from another angle. He is able to change the terrain simply by imprinting his complex and very dense magical power into it. That's why he was able to suppress their magic. It just has a lower density. She exclaimed excitedly, "Then does this mean that His Excellency's magical powers have surpassed the sage?" She replied that there is also a chance that Rain's magic is mixed with something unknown, and this thought made her uneasy. He remarked that it was because of them that it sounded amazing. Until he understands his own magical power, he will not be able to use magic. Elria added that there was a chance his magic wasn't natural. He looked at her in surprise, and she asked, "He was sick when he was little in his past life, right?" Alma looked puzzled, and said that it could be a reaction to another magical power, and he asked, "That's when another magical power flows through the body, and it, in reaction, rejects it, right?" Alma said that it was because his magic was flowing in his blood. It was similar to when, during a blood transfusion, the body refuses to accept it, but gradually it gets used to the magic and stabilizes. He said that he understood what she meant, but isn't that strange? Elria agreed with him. Magic wasn't common knowledge at the time. Alma said that she heard about it from a report about a child who suffered a severe injury. This child was given more blood than recommended. Elria noted that they only know about this thanks to the advances in modern healthcare. 1,000 years ago, they gave large amounts of blood transfusions to children from poor families several times. MC said that his body was indeed weak, but he was never injured. Elria said that was why someone tried to make it so that only their magical power flowed through him, but that was still impossible at this age. Moreover, they channeled an unknown magical power into him, knowing for sure that it would work. It was as if someone from the distant future had given him strength. Rain noted with a smile that thanks to this, he is who he is and he doesn't complain. She asked in surprise, is he sure? He told her that if it weren't for this power, he would have died on the roadside 1,000 years ago. Thanks to this, he was able to meet her and live a happy life. So he is very grateful to that person. She smiled, and Alma said that to buy time, she can report on this little by little, after which she can study his excellency. Then she remembered something, and nervously put her hand in her pocket, saying that she needed to give him something. She laughed nervously and handed him a letter. The wax seal had the royal family crest. Sometime later, he was already on his way to the palace at the princess's invitation. He cursed and asked how she could so easily forget to deliver the invitation. Liat would not have allowed such a thing to happen. A few hours earlier, at the Caldwin residence, they went to Alicia to tell her about the invitation, and she asked how much time was left. MC nervously told her that there were about 2 hours left, and she, clutching her fan in her hands in anger, ordered them to quickly start preparing. At the moment, Elria embarrassedly said that she didn't really like parties. Ryan noted that this was a direct order from the princess, not to behave like that. She told him that it was hard for her to move in the dress. If she moved too much, her hairstyle would simply get ruined. He told her with a smile that she had put so much effort into looking so cute, it would be a great loss to ruin everything. She looked at him shyly and said that then she would be meek. After which, the carriage finally stopped, and they headed to the palace. Rain would never have thought that he would come here. At the entrance, they were met by a butler and told them that he was waiting for them. He serves Her Highness as a caretaker. He is the head butler of Selvas. MC bowed slightly, greeting him, and said that they came at Her Highness's invitation. He smiled and thanked him for his politeness. He was also glad that Elria had not changed at all. At this time, she hid behind Rain's back, and he apologized to the butler for her. She was quite shy. He smiled and said that he understood everything. Since childhood, she always hid behind Alicia's back. Elria cautiously looked around and asked where she was. Selvas told her that he was holding Her Highness back with his magic, and she said that if it was his magic, she was at peace. MC was confused as to why he was holding the princess back, and the butler was about to lead them into the palace. But suddenly the doors burst open with a bang, and something flew past Ryan at high speed and stopped. The princess cursed and told a terrified Elria that she had finally arrived. She had almost missed her. It was the first princess of the magical kingdom, Christia von Vigalta. Elria was confused and hid behind Ryan when she saw her approaching, but she quickly walked around him and hugged her tightly, saying that she had missed her so much. It had been 3 whole years. Elria asked her not to cling to her every time they saw each other, and the butler apologized to Rain for having to witness it. Her Highness Princess Christia has known Elria since childhood, and treats her like a younger sister. She fell so deeply in love with her that the king ordered her to go to school and would not return home until she finished. Christia's attention shifted to Rain. She called out to him with displeasure and asked, "So he's her fiancé?" He bowed to her, smiling and saying that it was a pleasure to meet her, and she told him to drop the formalities. She grants him permission to call her by her first name, and she will also communicate with him informally. He thanked her politely, and she declared that she only half approved of him, and he asked what she meant. She hugged her friend and exclaimed that she meant that if she didn't accept their engagement, Elria would definitely hate her. He asked, so the other half meant that she doubted his abilities? She answered him discontentedly that she found it hard to believe that someone who couldn't use magic could compete with someone like Elria. He asked, so she invited them here to see his strength? She frowned and asked why he looked like he was used to this. He squeezed everything out to appear in her eyes as a gallant gentleman, and answered her that he wasn't used to it, he was just prepared for this. Since Elria had such exceptional talent and a reputation as a genius mage that this country is proud of, maybe she could explain his power too. That's why, instead of hiding it, he wanted to help her, which in turn would help the study of magic. They both blushed at his smile, and Christia clicked her tongue in displeasure, noting that he was more capable than she expected. Elria smiled and asked if he wasn't amazing. The princess hugged her and waved her hand, declaring that it wasn't just his strength that she didn't acknowledge. He immediately thought she was talking about his bloodline, and she said he could just do anything and gain recognition, but she was talking about something more important than that. What she wanted was to test his love for Elria. MC was greatly surprised, and the butler invited him inside, where a whole crowd of courtiers had already gathered, and Christia announced the start of the Who Loves Elria the Most competition. MC asked why all these people had gathered there. He thought they were the only ones invited. She told him that it just so happened that it was almost time for the usual party for the courtiers, which is why she invited them for a show. Those who have served in the palace for a long time know Elria, so they are curious about who her fiancé will be. He said with a nervous smile that it was a good observation, and Christia stated that she had already done her research on his daily routine at the Magic Academy, and despite being branded incapable of using magic, he still contributes to the development of his village. Even after considering all this, she still does not admit that he is worthy of Elria. She is not so young and foolish as to turn a blind eye to the facts. But personally, she feels that he is taking her away from her. He did not know what to say, and simply apologized to her. And she exclaimed that even if there were no spectators here, she would still check whether his love for Elria was true or not. Selvas took the microphone and said that Her Highness Princess Christia loves Elria so much that she behaves eccentrically, and Rain Frieden, who, fortunately, is her fiancé. The competition between the two would be conducted by him, their eternal servant. Christia anxiously asked him to wait. She sensed ill intent in his introduction. He continued, saying that everyone who worked here already knew about this, and so they had high hopes for Rain. The winner would be the one who knew Elria best. Elria, meanwhile, sat on the balcony in the most honored place. She smiled awkwardly and, with tears in her eyes, whispered that she wanted to go home. And Christia said that she was sweet even when embarrassed, and that she loved her. She couldn't stand standing there any longer, and ran to her balcony. But Selvas's magical chains stopped her, and he said that touching Elria was forbidden. MC was shocked and thought, did the princess just break the chains? The butler dragged the princess down the stairs. He noticed Rain's gaze and asked, does he have anything to say? He said that it hadn't been long since he met Elria, but as her fiancé, he would do his best to live up to her and everyone else's expectations. Christia exclaimed that she had known her since childhood. She knew her likes and dislikes, even how many times she extended her afternoon tea and what types it was. Selvas said that they could answer with the push of a button, and the one asking questions and judging would be Elria herself. She was surprised that she would do this, and the butler apologized to her for the inconvenience, but many asked to hear her voice. Christia was very excited. Elria took the microphone and said that she would try her best. And then it was time for the first question. Christia was so excited that she hit the button with all her might and, with tears in her eyes, shouted that Elria was terribly cute. Selvas asked her to mind her manners. If she did it again, she would be punished. The MC awkwardly turned to him and asked if he could read the questions for her, and he agreed with him. It would be better that way. The first question, what is Elria's hobby? Christia immediately pressed the button and declared that it was reading. Not just books, she likes to read papers about magical research. The butler turned to Elria and asked, is that correct? She nodded, and he said that Christia answered the first question correctly. She smiled proudly and looked at Ryan, asking what he would say to that. He doesn't need to hear the whole question to know the answer, right? He smiled nervously and agreed with her, and she asked if, even though he was her fiancé, he couldn't answer a single question until the very end. He told her not to worry about it. He was just very surprised by her reflex. He glanced at Elria. She looked at him as if she was sure that he would answer all the questions. This made him uneasy. She had high expectations of him. The second question was about what Elria does when she sleeps. Before the butler could finish, Christia pressed the button and exclaimed that she was hugging a stuffed toy. It was her favorite big black dog, Wall-E. MC was about to press the button too, but didn't have time. The princess beat him to it, and he immediately realized that she was using magic. The speed she showed in their first meeting, he had seen similar magic in the past. If they are the same type, then she predicts the question and answers it. In other words, her speed is simply unbeatable. Meanwhile, Elria glared at Christia with displeasure and asked the butler if she could come up with the next questions. Selvas was surprised and told her that he understood everything, so let her begin. She asked, when she was very tired, what was her favorite seasoning for food. Christia asked if that was too specific a question. She answered that she didn't think so. She just thought about it. She looked at Rain, smiled, and he pressed the button, saying that she liked salty food, so she used a lot of salt. Elria excitedly raised her hands, and the butler said that she seemed very happy herself. The answer was correct. She asked in the school cafeteria what guided her when choosing what to eat. He answered that she chose food that was different from his because she wanted to split the dishes in half. He answered correctly, and she delightedly asked the fifth question. After taking a huge bath with Millis, what did she do? He sheepishly replied that she had stopped by the dining hall and bought desserts for two, then ate them with him in their room. She exclaimed, now for the sixth question. What does she do before going to bed? He turned away to hide his face, red with embarrassment, and replied that she was rolling around on the bed, trying to make sure she had enough space to avoid hitting him. Christia indignantly pointed her finger at him and exclaimed, he's the one saying all this, so why is he embarrassed? With these questions, they were just showing how close they were. She was sure they also fed each other in private. Selvas said that according to reports, they even do this in front of a crowd in the dining hall. It was time for the last question, and he gave the floor to Elria. She smiled and asked what she liked. They were both surprised. Then MC hesitantly pressed the button and said that she liked milk tea. Selva smiled and asked Elria, "Is he right?" She made a cross with her fingers, saying that he was wrong, and said that she would not tell them the answer. After that, she looked at Rain and said with a smile that it was a secret. Finally, the show ended and MC told the butler that he would like to rest here with Elria for a while, and he asked them to tell him if they needed anything. Elria immediately drank a whole glass of something, and the servants came up to them, congratulating her. MC noticed that the people from the palace were worried about her. After that, they went out to the balcony, and Elria said that even as a child, whenever she came to the royal palace, Christia was always next to her, and she would never have thought that they would all worry about her so much. Despite the fact that she is too active, she feels better when she is with her. Christia came up to them and said that they were great. MC smiled and thanked her for giving them such a good opportunity and for introducing them to the palace staff. She smiled and said that even though she had deceived him at first, he was a good guy. To be honest, she hadn't expected such a warm relationship between them, but she had to call them because she needed their help. Her eyes suddenly changed. She called him a hero, Altane, and noted that by the looks of it, he had had a good time. Rain responded by calling her little Tiana and asking if it had been so long, and she was still making such a scary face. She looked at him confidently and frowned slightly, and he said that he knew Princess Christia looked like someone. It turned out to be her. She remarked that he was quite attractive in his youth. She would never have thought that that old grump could look like that. He smiled and said that he was surprised too. A little girl starting to cry after losing to an old man appeared like this. She said with displeasure that he still got on her nerves, and he asked, "She didn't reincarnate here, right?" She told him that with the help of magic, she sent her consciousness from the past here, and she borrowed Christia's body to talk. Elria asked, "Does that mean she's Tiana?" She looked at her with some sadness, and then smiled and with tears in her eyes confirmed it. Elria asked in surprise, "Does that mean Christia was Tiana all this time? And when Christia clung to her, it was her?" She excitedly exclaimed that most of the time it was Christia, although she really did switch places with her sometimes. Elria exclaimed indignantly, "So when she stayed overnight and Christia made her try on all those things, it was her?" She became embarrassed and answered her that it was Christia too. She just told her which outfits would suit her, and she also saw the photo she took. Elria ordered her to sit down, and she immediately happily fell on her knees in front of her, after which she sat down opposite her and said that she didn't want her to be happy when she scolded her. Tiana told her that was impossible. Of course she would be happy about it. She burst into tears and said that, more precisely, she would be happy that she could finally talk to her. To be honest, she wanted to contact her as soon as possible. Just like when she was alive 10 years ago, she wants her to say her name with a smile. Elria hugged her and said that she was also glad that she could meet her again. It had been 10 years since her death. She was probably quite an adult by now. Tiana told her that she was taller than her now, and she remarked that she must have still been a real beauty back then. She smiled through her tears and said that it was a pity that she couldn't show her. She apologized to them. She almost didn't have time left. She just couldn't control her emotions. MC asked, since she revealed herself, that meant she had something to tell them, right? She wiped away her tears and told him that it was true. It also applied to how she was related to Christia. First, she would start with the cause of Elria's death. She died because she lost all her magical power. 1,000 years ago, the era in which Elria lived, Rain told his assistant Liat that the quota seemed to be met for today, so it was time for them to return. Liat said that he thought it wouldn't look good if he was his only companion, and he replied that the fewer companions, the easier it would be for them. Suddenly, several rocks flew at him at high speed, but he deftly dodged them all and greeted Tiana with a smile. She lunged at him, but he kicked her in the leg, causing her to lose her balance, and he noticed that she still lacked speed. She quickly flipped in the air, and he realized that she was about to attack, so he punched the ground to throw rocks into the magic circles above him. After that, he smirked and noted that her magic was annoying as always, and then a magical hand grabbed the girl and lifted her into the air. It was Elria, and she told her not to do anything she wasn't asked to do. She became worried when she saw her there, and she, having seated her on her magic staff, noticed that she had run out of magic power again. She apologized to her, and she roughly shoved the vial into her mouth and told her to drink a magic power restoration potion. After watching them, MC laughed and said that she was using up her magic power very quickly. She still needs to train for another 100 years before she can compete with him. Liat noted that she had time-jumping magic. To be honest, it would be hard for anyone other than him to counter her. He noted that to do this, you need to be able to predict this girl's actions. If you understand her thought process, then it is quite possible to cope with this magic. And he can do it too. Liat told him that usually he can analyze it, but he cannot stop it. After a while, the girls returned to the estate, and while Elria was reading books, Tiana asked what she thought she should do to stay in the world of time longer. She thought about it and asked when she enters the world of time, she transforms her body with magical power, right? She confirmed this, adding that the expenditure of magical power for this is very high. At this time, she seems to see frames from the near future moving in front of her. So her entire body is transferred into the future. She can only jump in time by about 10 years. Recently, she learned to transfer only her consciousness into the future, and therefore began to see an even slightly more distant future. But she still cannot defeat this old soldier, and therefore she is upset. Elria asked, "Does this mean she wants to see the future? This is already beyond the ordinary. This is the level of the soul or the gods." Tiana excitedly exclaimed that she was right, but theoretically it exists, so there is a possibility. Elria said that for a person like her it is probably difficult, but for an elf like her, it is simple. Tiana's mouth fell open in surprise, after which she exclaimed in delight that this was expected of her, and she smiled and said that she appreciated her ability to sincerely praise people. She wanted to take a sip of tea, but it ran out, and then Tiana ran out of the office, saying that she would make more tea. When she returned to the office with the teapot, the maids worriedly told her that she could delegate such mundane tasks to them, but she refused. She wanted to bring her tea herself. She entered the office, asking her for forgiveness for making her wait, and then she suddenly dropped the tray from her hands. She saw something shocking. Elria was lying on the floor without moving. Tiana rushed to her, and realizing that she was dead, she burst into tears. After her death, she wanted to see her alive again at least once, and looked for a way to go back in time using time jump magic. To do this, she took Elria's staff, used it to enter the world of time, and saw 1,000 frames. But upon returning, she noticed that there was a hole in the time tunnel. She immediately rushed there, and while passing through it, she found herself in a world 1,000 years in the future, in Christia's consciousness. In this future, there was a girl very similar to Elria. In order for this future to become real, she inherited the role of a sage. They joined forces with the remnants of the Altane army, which disintegrated after they lost their hero, and destroyed the Altane Empire. Rain looked down sadly upon learning this, and Tiana said that she was now trying her best to spread the magical techniques that Elria had invented throughout the continent. To travel to 1,000 years in the future, she needed Christia as a vessel and a magical item that contained Elria's power. And she can't make holes in time. In any case, the holes that formed in time allow her to travel back and forth, and thus, one could say that someone had either been reincarnated or jumped through time in the 1,000-year past. So she needed to make sure that the hero could be reborn in this world, just like Elria. Before she revealed herself, she didn't tell Christia anything in detail either. Elria thanked her with a smile for trying so hard for her, and she smiled back, then said that she had to go back already. Elria excitedly said that this united country they built had become even more beautiful than it was 1,000 years ago. Let her tell the people of the former Altane that they are now living happily in the future. Tiana smiled and said goodbye to her, and then left. Night fell. Elria and Christia decided to sleep together. The princess happily tossed a pillow and exclaimed that they hadn't spent the night together for so long. Elria said that she was surprised that she knew Tiana, and she thoughtfully replied that she wouldn't say she knew her. She just thought of her as another version of herself. She had no idea that she was one of her great ancestors, and she approves of her love for her. Elria noticed that they were very similar, only she spoke a little differently. She winked and happily said that it was to create a certain impression. Elria didn't expect to hear that, and Christia said that since everyone knew her as a strange-speaking princess, no one was surprised that she was talking to Tiana. Lately, she had also become known among ordinary people as a strange princess, so she was quite popular. She wouldn't question her. What she heard from Tiana was enough for her. After all, if she found out too much, she would have to change her attitude towards her. But no matter what happened, she would continue to be her friend, so that she could be there and support her in really difficult times. As for Rain, she felt like he was someone she could trust. She smiled, thanking her, and said that in exchange for her support, she would like her to let her take a photo with this magic item. Elria immediately refused, and she wouldn't be visible in the photo anyway. Meanwhile, at the Velgata Royal Magic Academy, Millis and Weasel were having dinner, and she said she felt a bit lonely without Ryan. Weasel asked what she was going to do on her day off tomorrow, and she happily exclaimed that it was good that he asked. Finally, she would go to the capital of the kingdom to have fun. He asked if she would be alone. This question immediately upset her, and told him that she would be alone, but Elria wouldn't. Weasel asked if he could go with her then. She became nervous and asked if he wanted to go too. He told her that he wanted to look for materials for a new magic item, since he had been of little use during the last exam. She immediately rushed to console him, saying that he had helped her a lot back then, and that he understood people's feelings well and was always there for them. He was a very kind guy. He turned away from her, embarrassed, and she was afraid that she had offended him and asked if she had said something wrong. He answered that it was quite the opposite. In the morning, they arrived in the capital of the kingdom. Millis looked around and noticed how crowded it was, and even that there was some kind of thing driving around the city. Weasel told her that the main means of transportation in the capital were magic items and teleportation, but they used a tram to get around the shopping district. She didn't understand what a tram was and said that she wouldn't mind riding this one, but she would like to try riding a magic car. He told her that magical cars could travel long distances, but they consumed a huge amount of magic, which was probably why only aristocrats had them. Millis remarked that he seemed to understand more than just magical equipment, to which he replied that it was only natural for a craftsman. They approached a tea shop, and she exclaimed that she had just been meaning to stop in. Meanwhile, Fairs, passing by in a car, saw them and asked the driver to let him out. They entered the shop, and Millis looked around in delight, noting that this was as expected from a shop that supplied tea directly to the royal family. It was so beautiful and charming. Weasel asked if brewing tea was her hobby. She told him that it wasn't really, but from now on it really would be her hobby. She took a box of tea and said that she thought this variety would be perfect for Elria. It had special tea leaves to keep her awake. Weasel said he sometimes drinks this tea. It's quite powerful. The girl smiled and remarked that since he said so, the tea must really be quite strong. It works by straining his eyes. He agreed with her. He should be more careful with it so as not to damage his vision even more. She asked in surprise, "Is it that bad?" He took off his glasses and, getting very close to her, said that he could only clearly see her face from that distance. She became very embarrassed at such closeness, and he put them on and said that it would probably be more comfortable if he developed something that could be placed directly on the pupils. Embarrassed, she dropped them and ran to the checkout. When they left the store, they decided to rest on a bench, and she asked why he decided to take martial arts lessons with Rain. He told her that he had developed an interest, but the real reason was probably that incident in the academy cafeteria. After all, Rain had blocked her with his body before Fairs could use his magic, and then reflected it. To be honest, he was offended. She got really nervous, and her face turned red from what she was imagining, and he said that his body had refused to move that time, and that was unacceptable for a mage, so he wanted to get stronger. And besides, Rain was just cool. He admired him. She agreed with him, then began to quickly drink her drink and thought that she had become nervous. She had already thought that he liked her. Suddenly, Fairs' voice was heard behind them, causing her to immediately spit out everything she had drunk, and he asked the two of them to tell him more about what they had just discussed. Weasel turned to him and asked, "So he came here too?" Millis told him that Ryan and Elria weren't with them today. They were called to the palace, and he claimed that he wasn't asking about them. "So, they want to take lessons from this commoner?" Millis said that it was nothing unusual. Those two often mentored them when it came to magic. Fairs thought for a second and asked if they knew what would happen on the situational exam this month. Weasel told him that they were supposed to practice working in a team to prepare for the comprehensive exam next month. And Fairs asked if there should be 5 people on one team, right? They became nervous, understanding what he was hinting at, and he smiled confidently. The next morning, the two finally returned to the academy and came to class, and Weasel and Millis, seeing the girl, were very surprised and asked if it was morning, and was she cheerful, and wasn't she swaying? She told them that she wasn't usually as sluggish as they said. Ryan made her some milk tea, so she's been feeling energetic since the morning. Millis's mouth dropped open in shock, and MC asked, "Is that so surprising?" He sat down, and Weasel asked how everything went at the palace. He told him that they had spoken with Her Highness the Princess and attended the Thanksgiving reception. Many people had thanked him for Elria, including progress in their personal circumstances. He remembered Tiana's story, and thought that if someone had stolen Elria's magical power, it was most likely some technology from the future. So, now it turned out that someone from the future might be involved in their reincarnation. Weasel sighed heavily, and said that while they were resting, something had happened here too. Elria worriedly asked what was going on, and Millis reminded them that for the upcoming exam, the group needed 5 people, and they were only 1 short. And yesterday, they had decided who that person would be. He made a puzzled face, and at that moment Fairs approached them, happily saying that it was a beautiful morning. MC asked if he often came to them. He was confused and nervously replied that training for the upcoming comprehensive exam had already begun, which is why he approached them. Then Rain understood everything, and Fairs said with a smile that from now on, as members of the same team, they would work together. It's just that the situational exam was not counted because armored dragons suddenly appeared during it, which in this era are supposedly considered extinct. They were considered a threat to the existence of magic, so they were exterminated, along with even the beasts from which they mutated. In the archives, they are listed as deceased. It was decided that the next situational exam would feature mock battles between teams of 5, and Fairs joined them. And in order to prepare for the exam, they came to the training field. Elria snuggled up to Ryan, and he asked if she really had to hug him. She smiled and told him that when teleporting, if you snuggle up, the area becomes smaller, requiring less magical power and coordinate calculations. He asked, "Is that true?" Millis remarked that this scene had become commonplace, and Weasel agreed. No one in the class was paying attention anymore. Fairs approached him and said that not using magic was very inconvenient. Without Elria, he wouldn't be able to use magic, let alone teleportation magic, or even magic items. He wouldn't have been able to handle it. He noticed Elria's intense gaze and nervously exclaimed that since he'd been unable to do it since birth, there was nothing he could do about it. MC told him not to bother and just act normally. A few hours ago, when Fairs announced that they would be on the same team from now on, Rain turned to Millis and said that he heard that his two friends were unlikely to be able to return to school before the exam. But why was he on their team? She told him that he thought someone in the class would invite him to the team, but everyone refused him, resulting in him being completely isolated. Now, Millis approached him and said that Elria was actually very strict. She would be interested to see if the son of a noble family like him could endure it. He replied that he was not a commoner like her, so it would be easy for him. She exclaimed that she remembered everything he said, and from now on, if he whined, she would call him a weakling from a good family, worse than a commoner. He became indignant and responded by saying that if he endured this, he would call her a country bumpkin, worse than a farmer. She replied with a mischievous smile that, unfortunately, her family was involved in livestock farming, and Weasel, watching them, asked, "Will he have to take the exam with these two?" Elria resignedly noted that she would have to teach them. Meanwhile, Alma sighed heavily and sat down, saying that it would be a training battle with His Excellency. It should have been so much fun, but everything was bad. Her assistant tried to calm her down, saying that nothing could be done about it. The academy's director said they needed to be prepared for emergencies. MC glanced at her and thought it was Philia Theresia, a first-rank mage assigned to Alma's assistant. She was the one conducting the exam for him and Elria. She said that this time, there were students from other classes, so you never know what could happen. Alma said that in that case, she should participate in a training battle with them, which made her nervous and exclaimed that she was just there as a teacher to supervise. Besides, she didn't have magic suitable for combat like hers. Alma grabbed her by the collar and dragged her toward the students, saying that if she disgraced herself as the one who recommended her for the teaching position, she would have to train until morning. Ryan glanced at his team and said it was time for them to start too. And Millis said they needed to clearly divide the responsibilities between them. Elria would now also be evaluated on whether she could train them beyond a certain level, and it was unclear whether they could continue to be on the same team. Based on the results of the previous exam, it was clear that Elria was almost certainly capable of becoming a mage. Therefore, to ensure she was worthy of being a special rank mage, it was decided that she would instruct the other students, while Alma would teach Philia. MC said they should then form a team with Fairs at the head, Valk and Lucas, who were currently not attending the academy, plus the three of them. That would be exactly 5 people. Fairs smugly said that this meant he would be the leader, and when Ryan confirmed this, he was confused and asked if he was serious. He nodded to him, confirming this, and then Fairs joyfully pointed to their team, asking so they should follow his every word. He answered that they would not follow his words, and he indignantly asked why. MC again called him a brat and told him to listen carefully. The leader's role is to make decisions. When the armored dragon attacked, he made the decision to flee. In a tense situation, he made the right decision, and thanks to it, he saved the wounded. In terms of decisiveness, he is better than the others. He can use 8th level magic, so if he is entrusted with command and decision-making during battle, the group's combat effectiveness will greatly suffer. So let Weasel, who is good at analyzing everything, handle this best. Weasel asked, so Fairs will be the one making the decisions about starting a battle and retreating? Elria said she'd been thinking about a plan with Millis in the lead, but of course, her opinion had to be taken into account as well. Millis, nervous at first, asked her to explain the plan, and she said that until the others figured out what to do, she'd have to do her best to repel the concentrated attacks. Millis, with a nervous smile, placed her hand on Fairs' shoulder and congratulated him on his leadership position, and he asked her to stop smiling. Elria, puzzled, noted that it would be a bit difficult for him to lead. The more powerful magic a person can use, the less often they stand in the lead. Rain understood everything. When you have a lot of magical power, like the boy, you can suppress an enemy's magic from afar, so physically, such people are the weakest. And Elria added that they are helpless in close combat. They looked at the two of them with smiles, and Fairs, furious, asked why they were looking at them like that. MC turned to Elria and asked if she would mind if he were responsible for this boy. She told him that he was even better suited for it, and then he asked Weasel for a magic item that he wouldn't mind breaking. Weasel tiredly touched his face and, with a heavy sigh, asked if he knew how much money went into producing magic items. He smiled awkwardly and told him that no one would break them on purpose, but if you put all your magic power into it, it might break. It would be good if it were something like a sword. Weasel said that he had a prototype, but it didn't live up to expectations. He gave him a sword, and he tried swinging it, remarking that it was not bad, and told the boy that they were starting training. Fairs pointed out that he couldn't use magic. What was he going to teach him? He answered with a smile that even if he couldn't, he would hit as if he used magic. If he can defeat him, he can fulfill his request to the best of his ability. He smiled and remarked that it would be interesting, after which they took a more spacious place for the fight, and Ryan said that here they cannot hold back and use magic to its full potential. He will wait 1 minute before attacking, so during this time, let him do whatever he wants. He asked, is he giving him a handicap? Apparently, he is quite confident in himself. MC in response said that he does not think he will lose to him, and then he took out a dagger and swung it, creating several fireballs, and shouted that if he wins, he will not allow him to call him a brat anymore, and let him not think that he can reflect his magic as easily as last time. Rain rushed towards him, smiling, saying that he cannot wait to try it, which made the boy slightly confused, and then directed the fireballs at him. He deftly dodged each one immediately followed by another. He fell with a running start and slid along the ground to slip under the last fireball, then rose with a smile and said that it was hot. He had good aim, but he needed to cover his weak points too. He couldn't do without using other magic. He called him a boy and pointed to his face, asking if that was where he was aiming. He exclaimed irritably that he was aiming there, then unleashed a stream of magic at him, which he dodged again, and noted that a direct blow that was so easily avoided was what made him so fast. But he knew that the spear of flame was just a decoy, and that in reality, he was also manipulating the fire that was concentrated in his blind spots behind him. He immediately turned around, parrying his attack, and remarked that the idea itself was not bad, but he still needed to work on mastering magic. Otherwise, because of the burning sound that rushed along with the flames, his attacks were not so effective. Fairs nervously clenched his teeth. He created a huge magic circle under his feet and exclaimed that he was supposed to be strong, unlike everyone else. How dare he disrespect him? He plunged his blade into the ground. 3 pillars of flame erupted behind him, and then a huge fire warrior appeared. The warrior pounced on Ryan, and he, smilingly saying that a minute had passed, parried the enemy's attack, causing Fairs to stagger and almost lose his balance. And then MC pounced on his fire warrior, and thought that if only he had mastered swordsmanship, he would not have to face such a thing. He was just wasting his talent. He swung his sword, dispersing its flames, then approached him and said that his brain and reactions were working well. He should teach him a little, and then he would be able to express himself in battle. He sees that he is capable of learning his swordsmanship. Fairs was surprised by these words. Meanwhile, Elria looked at this huge column of flame and said that Ryan looked like he was having quite a good time there. Weasel noted that he really did confront Lord Vermian alone. Elria said that perhaps he wanted to help the Lord, since he seemed like a difficult child to him. Besides, in Rain's past life, no one taught him any techniques. Millis asked, so he really was stupidly strong? She replied that she thought he had been taught something other than combat skills, like military art and strategy, but no one had been able to master his fighting style, so she thought Fairs had potential for Rain, and Fairs is also cheeky, so he wants to correct his character. Millis remarked that this was very typical of him, while Weasel worried about the condition of his magical tools. Elria, excited, said that it was time for them to begin their training battle, which horrified the two of them, and they asked why she had such a strange urge to fight. She said that if they were hurt, they would never forget it, and would remember everything just as quickly. It was the most effective and best way to learn. Millis indignantly exclaimed that she never would have thought she would hear that from the lips of a sage. Maybe she wasn't really a sage, but a sergeant? Weasel said he only remembered the taste of blood spreading through his mouth. A dragon flew overhead, and the rider asked if anyone from her class was there. She called out to the 3 of them and asked which tower they were from. Millis shouted back that they were from the East Tower, and she placed her dragon next to them, saying that the West Tower was the other way around. She believed Rafika when she said she absolutely had to come here. She dismounted and introduced herself to them. Her name was Rufus Lilas, from the Celios Federation. Weasel asked if that was the country that excelled in summoning magic. So, she's a student at the West Tower. Millis said she seemed to be nicknamed the Dragon Princess, even though she only looks 12 or 13 years old. Rufus noticed the second girl hiding behind the other, and asked why she was hiding. Millis told her that she had a habit of hiding when she saw strangers, and she excitedly exclaimed that she was just like a little animal. She ran around Millis to examine Elria, and told her that she had beautiful blonde hair. Did she really take the same entrance exam? Her name is Elria Caldwin, right? She came out from behind Millis and confirmed it, and Rufus said with delight that she had heard that there was such a strong person that she was called the reincarnation of a sage, and she was looking forward to meeting her at the academy. She awkwardly thanked her for this, and she, shaking her hand vigorously, said that she was glad to see her. Elria replied that she, too, had heard about the child who managed to forge a contract with the guardian dragons. She thought it was incredible. To forge a contract with all 4? This was the first time in history that such a thing had happened, and they said that in Celios one could see them in person. She answered with a smile that they were all here, Ethan Kale was constantly sleeping on the clouds. Maleficam was drifting in the sea with only one head above the water. Fromavai was having fun rolling on lava, and Magnifimos was basking in the sun in the forest or on the plains. Elria remarked with a smile that this sounded interesting, and Millis said with a smile that it was so cool. She would like to go on a trip abroad one day. Rufus ran to her dragon and said that this little one was the most important thing to her. Elria asked if he, by any chance, was a flying steel dragon. Rufus was surprised she understood this and said she didn't know the exact scientific name. Rufus answered with a smile that it was a Volensfirm, a large type, flying class, of the steel dragon family. Elria remarked that the fact that she could answer this immediately was already impressive, and Rufus said that she and Rafika had been inseparable friends since childhood. She asked, can she use 10th circle magic? She also used summoning magic? She answered that she could, but she glanced at her friends, and they happily said it was okay if she continued the conversation, forgetting about the trial battle with them, not to worry. Rufus asked if they were really planning a practice battle. Elria told her that she was planning to beat up those two to her heart's content, and Rufus challenged her to a duel. She wanted to see her magic. She and Rafika wouldn't lose to anyone, no matter who it was. Elria happily agreed. Looking at them, she too wanted to stretch her legs for once. She took out her staff, thrust it into the ground, and ordered Sheffrey out. A huge wolf jumped out of the magic circle, and Rufus noted that it was a magic-devouring wolf. She was surprised she even thought about taming it. Even the mages of Seolis couldn't tame it. That's why it's so famous. Elria wrapped the wolf in chains, especially its mouth, and said that it was very smart, so it understood that there was no way he could defeat her. Rufus frowned, smiled, and remarked that this would be fun, then climbed onto her dragon and took off. Weisel was surprised by her speed. She had already taken an advantageous position, and Millis called out to Elria, worried. She ordered Sheffrey to get to work, loosened the chains, and he immediately rushed into battle. Rufus smiled and said that he couldn't reach such a height, but seeing the wolf leaping toward her, she exclaimed in surprise. What was he even using to push off? She realized that this wolf was very sensitive to magical power. He could sense Elria's magic. As soon as there was a place to push off, he would jump. In this case, she ordered Rafik to use fire breath around the entire perimeter, and Elria, seeing sparks emanating from the dragon's mouth, immediately ordered Sheffrey to stop. The wolf's head was engulfed in flames. Then an explosion occurred, and Rufus exclaimed in surprise that this couldn't be true. Was the air pressure giving him a foothold? Elria excitedly ordered Sheffrey to act, and then he leaped onto the dragon and sank his teeth into her tail. Because of this, Rafika flipped in the air, trying to throw him off herself, and Elria asked her to calm down. They fell to the ground with a crash, causing the guy and the girl to worry about her. But fortunately, Rufus was okay. She worriedly ran to her dragon and checked on her. Meanwhile, Elria told Sheffrey to come to her. Joyfully wagging his tail, he ran to his owner, and she, having bandaged his mouth, hit him with all her strength and said that he was a good dog. He was so smart, he managed to stop. Weasel noted that he looked like he would cling to her at any moment, and she said that he feeds on magic power. She turned to Rufus and told her to better cancel the dragon summoning. Sheffrey ate a lot of magic power, so Rafika's soul will not withstand it. She declared that they were not finished yet. Rafika would never lose. She unleashed her magical power, causing the wolf to become alarmed and shield Elria. Then Rafika used her fire breath, instantly setting its fur ablaze. Elria was terrified for her wolf's safety. She immediately cancelled the summoning and told the girl with displeasure that it was too much. It was clear that its body was made of magical power, so it wouldn't die, but such powerful attacks damaged its soul. In a trial fight, it was unacceptable to intentionally try to kill an opponent. Rufus, with a cold gaze, replied that for her, a trial fight was the same as a real one. Elria was surprised, and as the girl was about to say something, a crash was heard. A column was being driven into the ground next to her, and Philia apologized for the intrusion. They were surprised to see the teacher, and MC, patting Elria on the head, said that he was the one who called her. Philia turned to Rufus and said that she understood they were conducting a trial fight, but her magical beast would likely be in danger if they continued, so she suggested they end it here. She was about to object, but then Ryan intervened, saying that if she wanted to find out who was stronger, then she should retreat this time. She would sacrifice her precious dragon for one victory? Was it worth it? Rufus looked at her dragon and, canceling her summoning, thanked her and wished her a good rest. Then turned to Ryan and said that the price of victory was not important, because for them, winning was the most important thing. After that, she left to surprised glances. When they returned to the academy, Elria was sitting on the couch, thinking about something. An MC approached her with a cup of tea and noted that she looked even more absent than usual. She told him that she was thinking about Rufus, and he asked thoughtfully, "So, the dragon princess?" When he looked at her, he felt nostalgic for once. In Altain, it was normal for children to become soldiers. They understood that it was a good excuse to get rid of them, so they tried their best to achieve something in order to survive. She had the same look as those children. He sat down on the chair opposite her and said that in any case, it was just his guess. But it seemed like she came to the academy with a heavy burden on her shoulders and the determination to do something. He frowned slightly, looking at the puppy in her lap, and asked if this was her magical beast that she summoned. She told him that she gives him magical power as a reward for his efforts. The body of such beasts is made of magical power, so if you make them small, the consumption becomes less. Besides, he is very cute. MC said he didn't look very impressive, and when she offered to pet the puppy, he asked with an embarrassed expression, "Can he really do that? And if his magic blew that thing apart, he'd probably be traumatized and out for 3 days. Elria said his mana was materialized, so he'd probably be fine. Closing his eyes, Rain reached out a trembling hand to the puppy, and as soon as his palm touched the soft fur, he excitedly said he was petting a dog. For some reason, the beasts always ran away when he got close, and he'd never been able to touch them like that. Suddenly, Sheffrey bit him, then made a displeased face and started spitting, which made MC very upset and said that the magical beast had also rejected him. Doesn't he have a future where living beings will love him? Elria hastened to console him and, pointing to her cat ears, said he could pet her. Seeing this, he laughed and remarked that it was just her style. She sat down on his chair and said he could pet her as much as he wanted until he got tired of it, and he thanked her with a smile. A few days later, at the training ground, Weasel and Elria fought in hand-to-hand combat. She, as always, was in the winning position. She laid the guy on his back, then suddenly a hole appeared under her feet, but she was able to jump to the side in time to avoid falling. After that, she told Millis that she was caught, grabbed her hand, and pulled her out of the hole. It seemed that was all, but she threw her high into the sky, and then with a loud scream, she landed right on Weasel. After that, Elria told them that their movements had noticeably improved. They should try again. The two of them asked her for a short break, and then someone's scream was heard in the sky. Right after that, Ferris fell on poor Weasel, and Ryan ran up to them, apologizing to Elria. The boy flew straight to her. Ferris indignantly noted that he was the one who sent him flying, and Elria said that he was still talking in such a state. It was quite impressive. Weasel asked if he could get off him. He answered him that he would get off, but he couldn't move. And then Millis roughly pushed him, and he indignantly called her a country bumpkin, asked if he couldn't be more gentle. Elria asked what the pampered boy was yapping about. MC was surprised to notice that the boy was more agile than he thought. He cast a spell that mimicked his movements, and in practice, everything seemed to be going well. But somewhere around the middle, his mana kept running out. He asked Elria for advice, and she thoughtfully said that controlling magicka consumption is an individual matter. And in the Vermian house they teach it from childhood, so it's unlikely she could offer any useful advice. Ryan scratched his head in confusion, and Ferris indignantly exclaimed that he'd told him so. After that, Weasel approached him and said he was a magical instrument engineer from Blanche. Could he take a look at his instrument? He gave it to him without hesitation, and after examining his sword, he said that due to shortening, the magic formula had partially worn off, but it had been restored as close to its original functionality as possible. Only now, if you use the wrong magic the instrument was sharpened for, it consumes noticeably more magic than intended. In Vermian, everyone is used to long-range spells, so the consumption is high. That's the problem. Fairs nervously asked, so he'll have to submit a request again? Weasel asked what the problem was, and he said that the last time he fixed the instrument, his father scolded him, saying he was a mage, and how dare he break a magical instrument. If he said it needed repairs again, what would happen? Weasel said that if the Vermian family didn't mind, he knew the workshop that made the instrument, so he could tinker with it himself. Fairs excitedly grabbed his hand and asked for his help. He didn't want his father to scold him anymore. Millis asked, so he'll be working in his family's workshop? He confirmed it, and she clarified, and Fairs will go with him, right? He replied that it was only natural, and she turned to Ryan and Elria, asking, does that mean they won't have anyone to train? They both called her name, and she covered her ears and screamed, saying she couldn't hear anything. So, next weekend they were all going to visit Weasel. The weekend arrived, and they set off for the capital. Just as she ran out of the station, Millis spread her arms wide and joyfully said that here it was, the big city, the capital of Vagart. She was here for the second time. Her friends moved on, and she excitedly ran up to them, asking them not to leave her like that. Bears clucked his tongue in annoyance, noting that she had noticed, and told her that they were going to the commercial and industrial district. If she wanted to see the sights, she could stay, but only alone. She said, dissatisfied, that he didn't understand anything at all. For her, whose main holiday is seeing a cart with a merchant or a cow giving birth, even this district is like a world-class city. Fairs had already forgotten that she was a country bumpkin and told her to have as much fun in the capital as she wanted. They walked through the city streets and finally reached Blanche's workshop, Weasel's home. Millis asked if the building was a bit small for the workshop of a famous magical engineer. Weasel said she could speak frankly. It was an old wreck. Almost all of their profits went toward developing new magical tools and purchasing materials, which is why the building looked like that. He went inside and said that today he had rented the entire space, the workshop being on the floor above. They went up to the second floor, and MC, looking around the room filled with all sorts of interesting things, asked if these were all magical tools. He answered that they were a kind of template, a prototype. They were used to calculate the necessary magical formula, then select the shape and materials suitable for a specific spell. After approving the general layout, they decided where to place the magical formula and ordered the engraving from a magical engraver. He extended his hand to Fairs, asking him to give him a magical tool, and he worriedly asked if anything would happen to it. He smiled and told him to trust him. He would show him what a master named Blanche was capable of. He gave him a tool, placed it on the workbench, and used magic to create the entire configuration. After reading the information about the tool, he noted that everything was as he had expected. The frequently used magic formulas were fixed, while the rest of the circuits were not even allowed through, blocked at the entrance. Had he used these 5 types of magic recently? He answered that he had recently compiled these formulas, and Weasel said that the form could be left as is, but the converter and stabilizer might need some tweaking. While they were busy, Ryan glanced at Elria and said that she had adapted it beautifully for magic. The converter and stabilizer, weren't they technologies they took as trophies from Altaine? She nodded with a smile and said that she had recovered what was lying on the battlefield, analyzed it, and tried using magic. He said that it was in place of the electricity they used. Even he doesn't really understand how it works, so she's a real sage. She was very happy with his praise, and Ryan heard Farah's excitedly ask what the problem was. Weasel answered that the problem was in the engraving of the magic formula. He and his house had different magic systems, so it was difficult to make a perfect engraving. As a result, the effectiveness of magic would not increase, but on the contrary, decrease. He asked, then why not commission the engraving from a magic engraver he knew? He answered that it was possible to commission it, but if he accidentally let it slip that he had worked on a magic instrument for such a noble house as Vermion, it would reach his father as well. He excitedly exclaimed that this could not be allowed, and Weasel asked Elria if she could do it. As far as he remembered, she was proficient in 6 magic systems. She answered him that she had never engraved magic formulas, and Ferris fell to his knees in despair, exclaiming that this was the end. Then Millis put her hand on his shoulder and said with a smile that, if it was about engraving the magic formula, she had done it. He looked at her with surprise, and she said that in the village, if you wait for a master, it would take half your life. So if a magical tool for fieldwork broke, she fixed it herself. Weasel gave her a tool he didn't mind wasting, so she could try transferring the engraving onto the workpiece. And she asked if it was basically the same as with ordinary magical tools, right? He answered that this was more difficult. The work required subtlety and precision, much more than with a regular magical beast. If it shifted even a millimeter, the effectiveness of the magic decreased. Millis quickly transferred the engraving to the blank, and showing it to him, asked, "Is it something like this?" Weasel was shocked and delighted at the same time. She had done everything perfectly. She laughed, pleased with his reaction, and said welcome to her era. She climbed onto the crate and looked down at Ferris, asking if he wanted her to engrave a magical formula for him. He became nervous, suspecting something was wrong, and asked what she wanted in return. She answered him with a smile that he would simply owe her, and he exclaimed that he was already scared. What was she even thinking? Weasel said that he really did owe her now, and he indignantly asked if he was crazy. Weasel, dumbfounded, said that he was simply amazed. She was so talented in magical engraving that he did not understand why she even entered the academy as a mage. She proudly answered him that the word mage simply sounded so pretentious and prestigious. That's why she chose this option. Fairs exclaimed, how could such a fool be trusted to work on the engraving? Weasel put his hands on his shoulders and assured him that everything was fine. He'll make the best magical tool out of it, so let him turn a blind eye to her quirks and let her work in peace. He had no choice but to agree, and they both rejoiced. Elria remarked on how much fun they were having, and MC said that young people could afford it. Millis ran up to them, and he asked what was wrong. She said she'd been thinking that their work would likely drag on, after which she showed them a guide to the capital and suggested that the two of them go on a date and take a walk, and that they could buy something at the same time. After that, they left the workshop, stood in the middle of the street, and Ryan began to think about where to go. Elria was very embarrassed at this time. She couldn't believe that they were on a date right now. Last time it was before an exam, then there was a reason, and today it was just a date. He asked if she needed anything, and she told him that she didn't really need anything. He said that he wasn't going to buy anything either, and then she looked at him with tears in her eyes and asked what they should do then. He couldn't bear to look at her tears and quickly came up with everything. When he and his sister went for a walk in the neighboring town, she said that even if you don't buy anything, just looking is also very fun. Elria was surprised that he had a sister, and he told her that he also had a brother. They both, unlike him, are very strong in magic, so they left the village for other magic academies. He suggested that she just walk and look around, without necessarily buying anything. They could buy something to eat, and her friends could also get something at the same time. She smiled, noting that it sounded fun, and he, holding out his hand to her, said that then everything was decided. She took his arm, but seeing how other couples held palms, she tugged at his sleeve and shyly exclaimed that she wanted to hold hands with him. He looked slightly confused, put his hand in hers, which immediately made her face turn red. Then she raised her hands and caught her breath, saying that this was a battle of the highest level. He did not understand what she was talking about, thought for a bit, and suggested that she release that magical beast, let it also take a little walk. After that, Sheffrey appeared in front of them, happily wagging its tail, and they, having attached it to the chain, took the leash together, and MC said that it was almost the same as holding hands, and it is not at all necessary to do everything like everyone else. If she is so nervous, she will not be able to enjoy the pleasant moments. If she feels awkward, then let her say so. If she doesn't want to rush, then they won't. She smiled and told him that everything was fine. She was grateful to him. Everyone around heard their conversation and thought he was such a gentleman. They ate street food, walked, played with Sheffrey, and the whole day passed like that. They sat down to rest, and Ryan, watching the setting sun, noticed that time was flying by so quickly. Elria said that she hadn't walked so calmly in the capital for a long time, and he agreed with her. And it seemed Sheffrey had gotten used to him a little. She smiled and asked if he didn't mind. Maybe he would continue to walk with him. He excitedly answered her that he would definitely walk with him, at any time, even in the morning or at night. She noticed that he was so assertive. She noticed Rufus sitting on the fountain. She saw someone in the distance and immediately perked up. A stately woman accompanied by 3 knights walked toward her, and she jumped up from her seat, calling her mother. She ran up to her and said she was so glad to see her. Why was she here? If she was here for the academy, then everything was fine. Compared to Sirius, there was little nature here, but it was full of magical things that she had never seen before. Everything here was very convenient. There was also a lot of unusual food here, but you just have to try this. It's very tasty. She wanted to say something else, but her mother roughly slapped her on the cheek and said that, as far as she knew, she still hadn't used her guardian dragon at the academy. All her actions and successes at the academy were reported to her. Training was no exception. She heard that in a recent mock battle she lost to the sage reincarnation. She exclaimed that it was not so. She didn't lose. It was a draw. Her mother said she couldn't do anything against a restricted opponent, only managed a shameful backhanded blow. And they call this a draw? Rufus became nervous, and her mother said that was to be expected. She should have gotten rid of this steel dragon before she entered the academy, but she decided against it, thinking it would be bad for her peace of mind. But she continues to refuse to use the guardian dragon and stubbornly clings to this inferior one, the steel one. And in the end, she lost. She understands that despite the contract she made, she doesn't fully control the guardian dragon. But if she summons this inferior dragon because it's the only one she can control properly, then it's time to put an end to her weakness. Rufus waved her hand and exclaimed that this wasn't what they agreed on. She herself said that if she wins at the academy and becomes a mage, she will let her keep Rafik. Her mother said that her job was to demonstrate the greatness of Sirius. Losers were of no use. She burst into tears and said that next time she wouldn't lose, she would definitely win the exam. Suddenly, Elria touched her shoulder and told her mother that she was saying the wrong thing. The woman asked who she was, and she, standing up for Rufus, told her name. She was the reincarnation of the sage who had recently fought her daughter. Summoning a magical beast you can't control in a mock battle is fraught with accidents, so Rufus's decision to choose Rafika was the right one. Besides, Rufus won that mock battle. Her mother frowned and asked, "Is this pity?" She answered that it was not at all. At that moment, she arbitrarily decided that the winner had already been decided and stopped the attack. Clearly, she had been overconfident. If they were in a real fight, Rufus would have won. The woman asked, "What's the point of all this talk about what would happen in a real fight? It wouldn't change the outcome of this duel anyway." Passers-by gradually began to crowd around them, as they had seen the girl get hit, and Elria replied that the mock battle was a model for a real battle, and the fact that she missed that attack was entirely her fault. MC also decided to intervene and told the woman his name, saying that as Elria's fiancé, and as a person who serves House Caldwell, he first of all wanted to apologize for her interruption in their conversation, but he wanted to speak out, even though it was impudent of him. They were in a public place. To avoid unnecessary misunderstandings, wouldn't it be better to move the conversation elsewhere? The woman looked around, noticing passers-by staring at them with interest, and bowed slightly to him, thanking him for his advice. After that, she called out to her daughter, which made her flinch, and said that that was all. As for her future, a decision would be made after the exam, taking into account her results. She left, and Rain lightly hit Elria on the head, telling her not to act so rashly. Rufus's mother was an important person from another country, and if she caused trouble, Lady Alicia would have to deal with it all. She apologized to him, and he said that he had more experience in how to behave in such situations, so she should leave it to him. While they were talking, Rufus decided to quietly leave, but Elria noticed this and asked her to wait. The girl lowered her head in disappointment and apologized to them for dragging them into this, but it was a family problem. She smiled and told Elria not to worry, next time she definitely wouldn't lose. After that, she ran off. Elria wanted to say something, but didn't have time, and MC suggested she return to the workshop. Time passed. They returned to the academy and went to the cafeteria to have dinner. Millis happily said that they had tested the magical tool's ability, walked around the capital, and that even ordinary food was especially delicious today. Fairs asked if he had really done something irreparable. The girl patted him on the back and said that friends should help each other in difficult times, and Ryan, completely confused as to why they were acting this way, asked Weasel what had happened. He replied that Millis had asked him to tell her what to look for when she requested a refund. He had recalculated today's engraving of the magic formula at the market value of the work, and it turned out to be around 5 million. MC, shocked, asked, "Is that true?" He confirmed this and said that it was also at a discount because she was not a certified master. But thanks to Millis, they achieved productivity beyond his expectations. As a magical engineer, he did the best work of his life, and he regrets nothing. Millis turned to Elria and happily asked how her date with Rain went. She remained silent as she was thinking hard about something, and then Millis waved her hand in front of her face, asking what was wrong with her. MC said that it was better not to bother her for now. Their walk went well, they had a great time, but towards the end, something happened. Elria saw Rufus at the buffet and suddenly jumped up from her seat, picked up her tray and said that she was going for more. Rain found this strange. She had tried everything in the capital's shops. She could no longer fit, and he, realizing who she was going to, told his friends that he would also go for more. Elria approached Rufus and asked her permission to sit next to her, and Ryan approached them, saying that they would like to talk to her. She looked at him with displeasure, saying that she actually wanted to pretend they met by chance, and she asked Rufus if they could sit down. She smiled, offering to eat together, after which she told the girl that she was very glad, since she didn't know anything except summoning magic, so she didn't even have anyone to talk to in class. That's why she had so much fun talking to her. Elria said that she had fun too, and then Rufus looked down in disappointment and apologized. Her beast had gotten really badly beaten during the training battle. She smiled and told her that everything was fine. Jeffrey shouldn't be angry. Rufus excitedly waved her hands and said that she continued to be stubborn anyway, and Rafika had also overexerted herself. Elria hastened to calm her down, saying that Rafika was simply trying her best to fulfill her wish and that she was doing well. Rufus responded by saying that her Jeffrey was also amazing, following her every command so precisely. Elria declared that she definitely wouldn't lose next time. She'd be subject to magical restrictions up to level 3 during the exam, but she was confident she could still win, and she was going to fight with all her might. She also had a goal she couldn't give up on. Perhaps this goal was less significant than her circumstances, but it was a promise she absolutely had to fulfill. MC remembered how she'd suggested they find out who was stronger, and Rufus had said that she really was very strong. She'd simply managed to form a contract with the baby guardian dragons. The teacher had told her that she would definitely be able to form a contract. Rain asked who the teacher was, and she told him that he was studying the baby guardian dragons. He'd told her so many things she didn't know. She'd trusted the teacher, talked to the baby dragons, and they'd accepted her. But baby dragons are very proud and willful. If they don't have enough mana, they get angry at their host and act according to their mood, meaning they rage and destroy everything. This isn't the case with Rafika. Just like her mother said, she really does rely on her too much. She burst into tears and said that she knows her family expects her to succeed, and she knows that her mother bowed her head for her. She understands all this, but she just doesn't know what to do. Elria suddenly stood up decisively and suggested that she fight with all her might. She was a little confused, saying that baby dragons don't listen to her, and she declared that when you fight with all your might, your soul becomes lighter, so let her fight her. MC told the girl that Elria meant that it's not the result that matters, but the process itself. She asked, "So it's not about winning or losing?" He said it would be best if she gave it her all and won, but even if she lost, there was nothing she could do about it. Rufus was worried because then her mother would be completely disappointed in her. And Ryan said that even if the guardian dragon lost, then no one else would be able to win. She could tell her mother to ask someone else and just run away. There was nothing wrong with that. Forcing people to wait and then shifting responsibility onto them is what is truly irresponsible. Rufus burst into tears again because she didn't know what to do, and MC told her to think only of herself during the fight and not of anyone else. If something happened, he would think of something. She called out to him in surprise, and he nodded confidently, saying that during the entrance exam, he extinguished Elria's level 10 magic with a punch, just with his bare hands. She's with them, so no matter what trouble happens to them, they'll handle it. Elria said she wants to give it her all in the fight with Rufus, and she doesn't want any trouble to happen. She's relying on him for that. He agreed, and Rufus laughed, saying that she also wants to fight her with all her strength. She extended a fist to Elria, and she punched it, smiling and saying that she'll be looking forward to their fight. After that, she left, waving cheerfully goodbye, and they waved back. Elria seriously told Rain that when she fights Rufus, she'll give it her all, but something will definitely happen at that moment. He asked what exactly was supposed to happen, and she pointed out that there was some inconsistency in Rufus's contract with the guardian dragon. Summoning magic is magic that transfers the soul of a contracted beast into a host created from mana and allows them to control it. The guardian dragon, even knowing that there isn't enough mana, still continues the contract with her. If he found himself on the battlefield not with his current strong body, but with a much weaker one, what would he have thought? He scratched his head in confusion and told her that if it had been an order, he would have somehow managed, but he would have been very unhappy. She said, that's how it is with magical beasts. If their bond was as strong as with Rafika, then it would be understandable. But MC noted that all 4 types of guardian dragons had made a contract with her and were still honoring it. It was very strange. It was as if the warrior dragons had been resurrected again. Elria said that she was also worried about the teacher she mentioned, and he remarked that he was confused by his words about her definitely being able to make a contract. As if he knew the future. Elria said that's why she wants to rely on him if anything happens, and he smiled and told her he'd do everything. She added that she also had one more request. She sat down and clutched her stomach, asking if he could carry her in his arms or on his back. He asked if she had overeaten. She could just not finish her dinner. Covering her mouth from nausea, she told him that it was all her childhood habit of not leaving food behind. He sat her on his back and pointed out that holding hands was forbidden, but carrying her on his back was fine. She told him that she was being carried like a wounded soldier on his back, so everything was fine. They returned to their desk, while Rufus went to her room and took out a magical device. She called out loudly for the teacher and asked if she could ask him something. He called her name, complained of pain, and asked, "Is that her?" She agreed, and he was surprised at how energetic she was, and asked if something good had happened. She said that she had lost in a mock battle, and her mother had gotten disappointed and hit her. He said that he had just woken up, so he wasn't ready to discuss such topics yet. Since she had contacted him with a magical instrument, did that mean it was urgent? She asked how she could learn to control the guardian dragons. He asked, so she wants to use them to their full potential, right? She said that she wouldn't be able to defeat Elria unless she could control at least one dragon. He said in a thoughtful tone that it was unlikely she would be able to do that. She was surprised by this and said loudly that, however, if she took the power of a guardian dragon. He apologized and said that he was paraphrasing. It was absolutely impossible for her to win. The one she wanted to fight was an absolute being. If guardian dragons are the pinnacle of magical beasts, then she can be called the pinnacle of everything. Rufus was upset about this, about to start crying, and asked, "Does that mean she can't defeat her?" He apologized to her, stopped crying, and said that he can't stand this. It seemed she had a chance of winning. She became interested and asked what kind of chance that was. He shocked her by saying that to do this, she needed to use all 4 guardian dragons. She said in a very surprised tone that, however, at the moment, she simply didn't have enough mana, and they would get angry. He said that, as he had already said, in the future, she would be able to completely control the guardian dragons. That's why they agreed to make a contract with her. So she should just borrow power from this future of hers. Sometime later, when the day of the exam came, Rain entered the tent. Alma was lying on the sofa. She noticed him and wished him good morning with a smile. He crossed his arms in displeasure and asked what she was doing here. She asked, no one could see her anyway, so why not? Her job was to be here in case of emergencies. He said that it would be better if she quickly brought up the image on the screen. She agreed, did something, and a multitude of screens appeared around them. He was a little surprised by this, and said that they could watch all the students. She agreed, and said that Eliza, who created it, was a real genius in magic and magical instruments. After all, even before becoming the director of the academy, she raised the level of magical instrument technology by several decades at once. Her character matches her appearance. They should look at their problem team that everyone is talking about. She pressed the button, the image on the screen changed, and they heard Millis loudly say that her insides were about to fall out from stress. Why is she the one wearing the gold bracelet? So, one hit and she's out? Alma watched and said that changing the rules right before the exam was too much. Apparently, there were those at the top who wanted him, sir, to fail. The protagonist asked if it was because he was his representative for the exam. It couldn't be helped. He couldn't control the magical instrument used in this exam anyway. His representative was Faraz, the protagonist's first student. He hadn't trained him for nothing. The students were loudly told that this was a battle royale between 8th grades where defeating an opponent would increase their class points. Defeating the wearer of the gold bracelet would earn bonus points. Thus, advancement to the next school year depended solely on them. Millis, looking very worried, loudly declared that if she were captured or knocked out, it would be the end for them. Weasel looked at her and said that her mental state was in jeopardy. Elria stood next to him and said that, however, she felt she was the most suitable for this role. She fell to her knees and said loudly that if we were to judge by strength, it should be her or Ferris. She said that the previous exam was about rescuing the wounded, and this one, they needed to survive until time ran out. He said that the best strategy for the wearer of the gold bracelet would be to hide. She was very happy to hear this and asked loudly, "Does that mean she only needs to hide?" However, to their surprise, she said that if possible, she wanted to eliminate the rest. Their team was missing one member because Rain was not with them. If they defeated her or Fairs, the other classes would gain an advantage, so there was a high chance that enemies were already heading their way. Weasel said that there was also a possibility that the remaining members would form alliances or join other teams. This was easy to imagine, so it would be a good idea to reduce the overall number of people. She said with a smile that when he found the enemies, the decision to attack them or not would be his. Fairs agreed and said that for the proud first son of the Verminon aristocratic family, victory was inevitable. It couldn't be any other way. He used magic, called them, and said that he had just detected several magical responses. There were 10 of them, and their movements were coordinated. What would they do about it? He stepped forward with a smile, drew his sword from its sheath, and said that it was obvious they would destroy them. His sword was engulfed in powerful flames. He looked at them and said that they should act as planned. He used magic and flew at great speed toward the nearest enemy. A team of students noticed him, and one of them said that the enemy was at 7 o'clock. They should all prepare to intercept. He flew toward them, swung his sword and asked, "Do you think they can shoot him down?" He swung his sword when they attacked with magic, and a very powerful explosion occurred. When the smoke disappeared, they couldn't see him anymore and said it seemed like it had done enough damage to teleport him away. However, one of them guessed that he was from above, but at that very moment, Fairs attacked with his sword. They managed to react to this attack, jumped aside, and one of them said that it was Verminon. They must stop him. He jumped to dodge the attack and began to slide on the ice that the enemy created with magic. The student was surprised by this and asked, "Isn't his strong point ranged combat?" He ran up to the two students, attacked with his sword, and said that they were too slow. Whiffle called him and said that the rest of the teams were moving according to plan. He asked, "Can they continue right now?" He didn't want to waste mana. He asked they heard, "Millis can make a wall, right?" He sent her the enemy's location. She was standing on a high cliff, agreed, and said that they could see them. She created a magic circle beneath herself, controlled her staff, and punched it hard. At that moment, a large stone wall appeared in front of the student team. They looked at it and asked, "What kind of wall is that? Are they trying to stop them?" "It's certainly high, but it doesn't look strong. An opponent is approaching them, 500 meters away. It would be faster to beat this guy than to break the wall." Weasel was running very quickly towards them, looking at them and saying that they were caught. He punched his fist, used Sever, and destroyed the magic circle of one of the opponents. He was confused by what happened and loudly asked, "Is his magic tool not activating?" A member of his team was surprised by this and asked, "Didn't he use it just now?" "This is all because of him. He doesn't know how, but he definitely did something." He continued to run quickly towards them and said that for the past few days, he had been defeated by a girl younger than him. Now, they would help him let off some steam. He took off with the help of his boots and flew towards the guy who couldn't use the magic tool. He delivered a strong punch, and the rest of the squad said loudly that they should be careful. He will try to quickly deal with them one by one. They should hide in the smoke. However, one of them looked away, noticed him running away, got angry and loudly asked, "Didn't he come to defeat them?" He turned around, apologized, and said that he only had to delay them and hit them to test his magic tool. They looked the other way and asked why he needed to delay them. They noticed that a large wall was falling on them and realized too late what was happening. They were all crushed, and he said that everything went better than he expected. He even heard their voices fading away. Millis was happy about this and said that they really defeated them with that. Elria flew to him and complained that they'd missed her role. His magical tool had overdone it. He happily said that blocking the magical tools had been more effective than he thought. She was still standing on the high cliff and said that it looked like Fairs had finished too. She looked back and noticed a huge monster that had crept up on her unnoticed. It hit its head on the slope she was standing on, and she started to fall, saying in a very frightened voice that she was going to die. The monster flew towards her, but Fairs was faster and managed to save her from the monster's attack at the last moment. She loudly thanked him for saving her and asked what kind of thing it was. A fish or a snake? He looked back and said it was a moray eel. Elria flew up to them and said that attacking her when she was not nearby was a good decision. She created several magic circles and said that, however, revealing herself was a bad decision. Alma was shocked by what she saw and said that these fights were not at all like the level of students. MC stood nearby, nodded calmly, and said that it was because he and Elria had trained them. However, they still put in a lot of effort themselves. She called His Excellency and said that she had heard that she was going to have a serious fight with the Dragon Princess Rufus. He turned to her, agreed, and said that she found her contract with the dragons strange. She thought about it too, and said that most likely everything would become clear when she used the guardian dragons. Does His Excellency know guardian dragons? He denied it and said that he had never heard of them in Altane. He only knows that they are powerful monsters. She said that there are records that a subjugation team was assembled 200 years ago. There were 150 people there, and 5 of them were special rank magicians, but they were all destroyed by the guardian dragon. To be honest, she doesn't think her magical power is comparable to 5 special rank magicians. However, if she really can summon him, and Elria is still limited to the 3rd tier of magic, the chances of her victory are practically 0. After some time, Millis laughed happily and said that they are the best. Fairs also laughed happily and said that he agreed with this simpleton. Weisel sighed with displeasure and said that apparently the 2 of them still had plenty of strength. She stood next to him and said that it was understandable that he was tired. He was responsible for reconnaissance, distraction, and team coordination. She asked with a very happy expression, "They managed to defeat 3 more teams, right? Isn't that amazing?" Elria caught their attention by saying that the remaining teams must have understood the essence of this test and taken a safe place. Their team already had the advantage, so it was better to avoid pointless battles from now on. Fairs, with a thoughtful look, agreed, and said that now all that remained was to... He didn't have time to finish because she said that the 3 of them should find a place to wait for the end of the test. He was surprised by this and asked what she planned to do. She said that she made a promise to Rufus that she would wait for her here alone. He was surprised by what he heard and asked, "Is she going to fight her guardian dragon? Is she crazy? Guardian dragons are not just strong. This girl has a great understanding of the language of monsters, and her monsters can use magic that is equal to the 10th level." She began to applaud in surprise and said that it was amazing. He knows so much. He became angry because of this and said loudly that now is not the time to applaud. The teleportation magic tool is not designed for the magic of guardian dragons. In the worst case, she will be blown to pieces before it teleports. Does she understand that? She began to sit on the ground with a calm expression and said that one way or another, she promised that she will fight with all seriousness. She can't solve everything with words like rain. She also doesn't know what to tell her when she is in trouble. She participated in many battles and found many important things. Just as she found her important things, she needs to fight with all her might to find hers. Ferris sighed and said that if that was the case, she could do whatever she wanted. They would leave, so no one would disturb them. She said that she asked them to go first and prepare the celebratory party. He started to leave and said that she had no doubt in her victory, just like her other half. She covered her face with her hands out of embarrassment and said that they were not married yet. He, looking a little displeased, said that he did not care. Millis waved her hand and loudly said that her life was important to her, so she would go. Withel also waved her hand and said that he would go too, before he was dragged into this. Elria looked at them and said that she was pleased to see that they were honest. A little later, Rufus flew to her on a dragon, called her, and said that she apologized for making her wait. She came to keep their promise. As she thought, she could not choose just one. Her connection with Rafik, with her mother, and the expectations of her country. She doesn't want to be disappointed with the contracts she made with the guardian dragons, so she decided to summon them all. With a joyful expression on her face, she activated the magic circle and summoned 4 guardian dragons at once. She looked at it in surprise and said that she was simply amazing, so she would show how serious she was. "So this is her full power?" She stood in front of her with a tense expression and said that it was. All the dragons headed towards her, and one of them attacked with a powerful beam that flew next to her. She used magic to defend herself, and thought that despite her defensive magic, she still felt the heat. Even if she used 3rd-tier magic many times at once, she wouldn't be able to defeat all 4. The only way to win is to use this. She summoned 5 wolves and said that although the enemy is terrifying, they must try hard for their mother. Rufus saw this and said that these were wolves, mana-eaters, but they wouldn't be able to absorb the magic of the guardian dragons. Elria jumped onto the wolf's back, but at that very moment, her dragon used magic and created a huge amount of water directed at her. Another dragon was also flying above them, using lightning magic on this huge wave. She noticed this and loudly called out to Mash. One of the wolves let out a loud bark and created several rocks, which they all jumped onto. She was surprised by what she saw and asked loudly, did she break the flow of water and avoid the electricity with stone pillars at the same time? Then what about this? The huge stone dragon swung its tail and hurled many large stones at her. One of her wolves jumped towards her to protect her from the stone, and she loudly called out to Mabiri. Rufus, smiling, used her gauntlet, called out to her, and said that she was only running away, but that she couldn't defeat the guardian dragons like that. Alma watched the proceedings and asked His Excellency with a concerned tone, "Doesn't he think she's at a disadvantage?" She stood up from the sofa and called out to him, but the protagonist, with a calm expression, told her to shut up and watch carefully. Now she was getting serious. The dragon began to attack them with lightning, one of the wolves leaped into the air, and Elria said that they should put their pride on the line and fulfill their assigned roles. One of her wolves exposed itself to the dragon's attack, and they continued to gallop forward. A huge flaming stone was thrown at them, but another wolf leaped into the air and exposed itself to the attack. She continued to gallop and said that their paths were a staircase leading to heaven. Rufus watched with a worried expression and wondered if she wasn't just running around. Was she up to something? A large wall of ice appeared around her, but one of the wolves pierced it with its head, leaving wounds on its body from the attack. She rode on the second wolf and said that their offering to the heavens was their noble pride and indomitable soul. She noticed that she was humming something, and remembered how the teacher had said earlier that she should listen carefully. The technique they now call magic was created by a sage 1,000 years ago. Humanity had used magical power to perform miracles before, but the inheritance of that technique was extremely difficult. To use it, there were as many requirements for skills and tools as there were stars in the sky. Such magic was replaced and forgotten. In ancient times, people prayed for miracles, using all available techniques. This is the source of all magic. At the same time, Elria descended from the wolf, began to dance with a staff, and said that the myriad stars in the celestial sphere should heed their wish in exchange for the price they offered. They must greet their brave comrades in the heavens and grant their wishes. The last wolf ran under the enemy's attack to protect her, and she said that to the enemy that stands against them, they must bare their fangs and show their strength. Her eyes filled with a bright light. She used the judgment of serious sorcery, and a clot of powerful energy fell from the sky, destroying everything before her. Rufus flew to her on Rafik, and she fell to the ground and said that she knew it. The effectiveness is terrible. She landed next to her, ran up and asked in a worried tone, "Is she okay?" She was lying on the ground with a happy expression, looked at her and asked what she would say about her full power. She sat down next to her and said that it was amazing. She lost even after using everything she could. She began to cry and ask her for forgiveness. Elria called her by name and said that she was very strong. She can be proud of the fact that she stood up to her full power. She called her with displeasure and said that she looked down on her. She agreed in a satisfied tone and said that it was her right as the winner. She continued to cry, but smiled and asked, "She knows that it's not cool when she says that while lying down, right?" Suddenly, she also fell to the ground, which greatly worried her and Rafik, and she loudly called her name. Rufus was breathing very heavily, apologized, and said that she suddenly felt hot. Suddenly, a bright column of energy appeared behind her, and she turned around and saw the guardian dragons, who had been summoned again. She called out to her with a worried look and said that she must cancel the summoning immediately, otherwise the magical power in her body would be depleted. She thought that she was still holding Rafik here, in addition to the 4 guardian dragons. She felt like she had summoned incomplete bodies. It turned out that she was able to fully summon them all, and control them so well that they defeated Mosh and the others. She called her name, and asked in a worried tone what she had done. She said with a tense look that the teacher said that since she lacked strength, she could take it from her future self. Elria created a magic circle beneath her, saw a black magic circle on her body, and asked with a very worried look, "What is it?" She had never seen such a color of magical power. She felt a strong pain in her heart and began to cough up blood. She held her staff over her with a frightened look and asked, "Is she really devouring lifespan?" So that's how she was able to summon the guardian dragons? The dragons nearby began to roar angrily, and Rufus, with tears in her eyes, turned to them and asked, "Why are they so angry? Why do they want to kill her?" One of the guardian dragons released a powerful stream of flame, but she immediately put up a barrier, which protected herself and the others. She thought that she didn't have enough magical power at this rate. She continued to hold the barrier with a worried look and called MC by name. At the same time, he, standing at a very large distance from them, summoned a huge skeleton, which threw a spear towards them with great force. He flew towards the dragon, who attacked with fire, and knocked him to the ground with a very powerful blow from his weapon. Elria fell to her knees and with tears of happiness on her face, called his name. He thrust a huge banner into the ground and said that none of them would pass this black flag as long as he was here. He called her by name and said that she should fill him in on the situation. She said that one cannot defeat the guardian dragons. Some magic makes Rufus replenish her magical power at the expense of her life. This is what maintains the summoning of the guardian dragons. She will figure it out somehow. He said with a smile that he understood everything and will play with these dragons for now. At that moment, one of the dragons flew high into the air and created a large thundercloud overhead. Numerous lightning bolts flew out from there, and he immediately jumped very high towards it. One of these lightning bolts flew near him. He caught it and said loudly that it was a spear of lightning. It had good magic. He grabbed it with one hand, quickly flew to the other lightning bolts, and destroyed it. He headed towards the dragon controlling lightning, but at that moment, another dragon released a powerful stream of flame at him. He reflected this flame into the sky and loudly said that it was not his turn. Thanks to this, the clouds dispersed and the rays of the sun fell on the field. He landed on the ground, but at that moment a stone dragon rolled towards him. He kicked it to the side and said that if he wanted to play football, he could play with it. This dragon crashed into the water dragon at high speed and it screamed loudly in pain. At the same time, Elria used magic on Rufus and thought that it seemed that someone else had cast this magic on her. When there is not enough magical power, it forcibly converts it from lifespan. She doesn't have time to figure this out. She urgently needs to replenish her magical power. She's suitable for this. She had an idea. She called Rafik in her language and said that her body was created from Rufus's magical power and her soul. She wants to return this power back to her, then they can save her. However, if someone outside interferes with their contract, their connection will be broken. There is a chance that she will not be able to return to her real body. Unexpectedly for her, she replied that it does not matter. She is asking to save her. She has always been with her and cared for her, always called her dearest friend. She is asking to save her dearest friend. Elria used magic on both of them, thanked her, and said that she promises to save her. Magical energy began to transfer from Rafik to Rufus, and she thought that she does not know exactly what will happen after the separation of the soul and her magical power. Even if her real body becomes just a shell and collapses, she will make sure that her soul is reborn in a new life. She hopes that they will meet again. She used the soul transfer spell, and immediately after that, the guardian dragons simultaneously disappeared. She came to her senses, called Rafik, and asked where she was. She heard the voice of her soul, turned to her and said that here she was. She was glad that she was here. She began to cry and said that if she suddenly disappeared, she would never forgive her. She said that they were together forever, she remembers, right? It's because she is her dearest friend. Sometime later, in the Celios Federation, a servant ran to Rufus's mother and loudly said that terrible news had arrived. The mistress's flying steel dragon. A few days after the exam at the main hospital of the Kingdom of Vegalt, Alma stood at the entrance and called His Excellency and Elria. Rain called her and asked if she got them permission to visit. She agreed and said that she had already received it. They should go to her room. They came to the ward. Rufus called them with a cheerful look. She brought her a basket of fruit and asked how she was feeling. She said with a cheerful look that everything was fine. She was told that she still should rest, but she ate a lot, and now she was full of energy. She said with a smile that it was good to hear. He asked if she heard about what happened after the exam. She agreed and said that she heard that everything was attributed to the fact that she lost control over the guardian dragons. She apologized for scolding them for what happened. Alma said that after everything that happened, it was expected that the three of them were forced to listen to Eliza's lectures. He said that she started having hysterics and crying while she scolded them. She said that they should discuss another topic. Could she please tell her side of the story? Who taught her this magic to control the guardian dragons? She said that it was the teacher. He studies the guardian dragons. He taught her magic and was with her when she made contracts with the guardian dragons. She asked with an interested look, "What is his name?" She thought about it, and Elria asked if something was wrong. Rufus said that she clearly remembered him writing it on a piece of paper. The protagonist asked, then maybe she remembered what he looked like? She immediately agreed and said that the teacher was an elf man. He had beautiful silver hair. Otherwise, he looked weak and unreliable. He repeated this description with a thoughtful look, and she called her by name and said that she wanted her to tell her something. When she said that the guardian dragons were angry, what exactly did they say? She became very worried about this question, and she took her hand and said that everything was fine. No matter what she said, she will not be angry. She calmed down a little and said that at that moment, the guardian dragons did not act like usual. They were shouting at her that she should kill her. Her mother entered the room and said that she had a message from Celios regarding the results of her situational exam. The international community recognized the guardian dragons as a threat to modern society. Even though she had lost control, Celios' summoning magic had become public. Like her, who can summon guardian dragons, she must continue to work hard. She asked loudly in a worried tone, "What about Rafik?" She promised to take care of her, but she never said a word about her. She was okay, right? She turned away from her and said that in her current state, Celios had no use for her and saw no point in keeping her. She could do with her as she pleased. The servant approached her bed and handed her Rafik, who had shrunk to the size of a child. Elria asked, so her soul was able to return to its task, but why was it so small? Alma turned to her and asked, maybe to match the size of her soul. Her body adjusted, or something like that. She remembered what happened then, and said that when she returned her magic back to her body, part of her soul ended up in Rufus's body along with it. Maybe that's why her body became like this. She reacted calmly to this, stroked Rafik and said that it was clear. She knew that she hadn't disappeared. She began to cry, and with a joyful expression on her face, said that she had always felt this. Now that she had shared her soul, it would always be with her. Elria, with a slightly worried look, asked if she was sure everything was okay with her body. She happily agreed and said that there were absolutely no problems. What if she now grew wings or horns? If it turns out like hers, then she doesn't mind. They laughed about it, and Rafika said that she wouldn't want her to become like that. Alma was very surprised by what she heard and wondered, is this the language of monsters? Rufus looked at her and asked, wouldn't it be cool if they had the same wings or horns? Then she would tie her a ribbon like hers. In her current form, it would look cute and fashionable. Elria came up to them and asked about the ribbon. Could she go buy it with them? She turned to MC and asked with a shocked look. Did he know that she could talk like that? He asked her not to eavesdrop on them and said that he didn't know that. After some time, he was still remembering what Rufus told him, called Elria, and said that she had never done anything bad to the guardian dragons in her past life or this one. Right? She said that, until recently, she had never even seen them. She can't even imagine why they turned against her. He said that then, does that mean that those guardian dragons are dragons from the future, pulled through time by her magical power? She said with a serious expression. And then there was that magical tool that teacher Alma had taken from her room. He took it from her, began to examine it, and said that it looked broken. But it clearly used technology that was not appropriate for their era. He thought that this design was similar to the mechanisms of Altane. She said with a thoughtful look that perhaps this elf teacher was connected to this. He said that first of all, they should ask Weasel to investigate it. They will find out if a similar magical tool exists in their time. The next day, they brought it to him, and he asked with a surprised expression, is this a magical tool? Rain said that he wanted him to check if there are regions where similar magical tools or magical equipment are used. He said with some surprise that I see, so the past was involved. Alma came to them, called him an Elria, and said that Eliza was calling for the two of them. They came to her office. She knocked and said that she had brought them. They entered the office, and she said that she had already scolded them, and, really, she didn't want to repeat herself. However, she had allowed them to use a maximum of the 3rd level. Right? She agreed with a calm expression, and she loudly asked, then why had she used magic of such a destructive scale? She said that it wasn't magic, but magical art. She didn't forbid that. She said loudly in a very dissatisfied tone that no one knew that she could even do that. From now on, magical art is also forbidden. She was unhappy about this, and Alma asked, that's not the main point, right? She calmed down a little and said that they recently announced that she would be at the upcoming exam. The protagonist said that, therefore, the high-ranking mages who would evaluate the two of them had been approved. Elsa said that 2 high-ranking mages, who were responsible for the eastern country of Regnia across the sea, would be responsible for the 2 of them. He felt nostalgic about what he heard, and Alma, with a slightly tense look, said that they had chosen problematic ones again. He turned to her and asked, what do you mean they aren't just strong? Elria said that if we were talking about mages from Regnia, then perhaps that was true. Mages from there use magic woven with a curse. Curses have conditions for removal, but in exchange, they often affect the body, giving the arms immense strength and making the legs hard as iron. He said that this is not at all like their magic. She said that it means he, too, won't be able to hit or grab such magic. He smiled and said that even if all 5 of his senses are blocked, he uses the 6th. She agreed and said that something like that could be expected from him. Elsa asked if she could continue already. The exam location was Palmare. There, they decided to give them an assignment to remove the disciplinary sanctions. They both looked at her with slightly surprised expressions and asked, did she say assignment?